All right. Well, it looks like we are in session. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning, Monday, April 4th, for our second and last meeting for part one of the EH&S Academy. And thank you for your time and participation in the Canvas setting as well in the virtual classroom. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end on how that's going to work throughout the rest of the week, just to make sure you can access everything and keep on networking. But right now, I'll turn it over to Drs. Emery and Patlovich.
Good morning from Houston, Texas. Hope you guys are all doing well. Scott and I will be tag teaming for this morning's session, and I know Scott's got to run out the door. So before I get going, Scott, did you have any stuff to kick off before you get started?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Emery. Good morning, everyone. Hope you guys had a great week. I've really enjoyed learning more about you on the virtual platform. So thanks for everyone to taking the time to put information up there about what you guys do each and every day in your various different programs. As I read through everything, I got a good chuckle because I realized we're not the only ones who have to deal with feral animal issues on our campus. I think it was Mr. Sibley mentioned he gets calls for feral animals, and I just laughed because, you know, on so many of these college and university campuses, there's no other place to call, so it comes to us, and I'm just glad we're not the only ones. So quick review of our plan for today. Dr. Emery is going to start out today by covering what we call the compelling display of EH&S metrics. We'll then cover a public health logic model that we've converted over for use in the EH&S world. And we'll go over EH&S metrics that matter. And then after the break, I'll return and help cover our SHRM annual report. We'll talk about the importance of the different elements that we include in that report. And you'll see many of the tricks of the trade that Dr. Emery will talk about first this morning roll into that. And then we'll conclude today's session with an overview of professional development strategies. So welcome back. Enjoy the course. And as we've talked about last week, please be as interactive as possible on the chat feature. If you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, that's fine too. We don't mind the interruption and the discussion. Let's make it as interactive as possible. Thanks, guys.
Okay, great. Thanks, Scott. So tell you what, I'm going to go into share screen mode here. And this first one's going to be fully interactive because we're going to spend, well, we have spent already time talking about the challenge in doing health and safety, that on a good day, nothing happens. And so we function largely in the realm of prevention. But the problem is we're not very good at collecting data to be able to tell the story about all the resources that are needed to make nothing happen. And so health and safety programs continue to grapple with what is it I should measure, how often should I measure it, that sort of thing. But another important aspect to that is how the data is displayed so that other people can figure out what the heck it is you're talking about. So what I'm going to show you, this first presentation, is some tricks of the trade having to do with data displays. And it's going to be fully interactive as we go along, and I'll explain what I mean by that. And you're going to have to use the chat feature in order to participate in this exciting exchange as we go forward here. So let me pull up this presentation here. And it should be in full screen. Let's see. Okay, hopefully somebody can give me a thumbs up there that you can see this presentation. And I'm so proud of myself that I actually put the current logo on there. I updated it, put the current logo. So that's that's actually helpful. So, okay, so the logo police would be quite happy to see that. So anyhow, what we're going to talk about is how we can improve our ability to tell our story to upper management and other stakeholders with regard to health and safety data displays that are compelling in nature. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Let's see, we got to do this way, I think. Okay, perfect. So, you know, our all EH&S programs should be thriving on data. We go out and collect a lot of data on measurements, and we do inspections and these sorts of things. And virtually every important decision that we make is based on data to some extent. But what I've found in my career is that formal training in the area of compellingly displaying your data is somewhat rare for not only safety people, but also emergency preparedness professionals as well. And what I've learned is that the ability to compellingly display data is the key to desired decision making. And so I think all of us in the safety professions have experienced bad examples of data display throughout our careers. I started out as a health physicist, and I can remember so vividly back when they had photographic slides and you'd be sitting in the room and they'd dim the lights and the person would get up and start talking and say, I know you can't read this, but click. I know you can't read this, but click, and go on and on. I think we've all endured them at some point. But something that struck me, because I'm sure Scott has mentioned, we do a lot of these collegial peer reviews, and I often ask during the meetings to see examples of the data that the safety program uses to try to tell their story. And it's fascinating. What I'm learning is that oftentimes you've got hardworking, good safety programs that the upper management doesn't understand what it is they do, and it has a lot to do with the way they convey their data. And I'm going to show you real world examples of that in a second, and I'll actually prove that assertion in spades as we go along. And I think if we can improve the way we convey our data, we'll be much better off in garnering organizational support. So how do we go about improving the way we display data? Well, our age-old problem is we're trying to present complex ideas and concepts in ways that are clear, precise, and efficient. And you may ask yourself, well, how do I go about doing that? Well, it turns out there's a whole body of scientific knowledge out there on how to display data. And so if you have a greater interest in this field and you do a little searching, two names or two authors will show up repeatedly, a guy named Dr. Tukey and a guy named Dr. Edward Tufte out of Yale. And they have written extensively on the notion that you can collect a lot of data, but if you can't display it in a way that other people can figure it out, it's virtually worthless. And so what I've done is, if you have a greater interest in this field, here's some key references, but I'm going to synthesize at least the information I've gleaned from this, and then I'll get into showing you some real world examples there. So first, let me summarize what both Tukey and what Tufte recommend. Number one is, do not blindly rely on the automatic graphing that formatting provided by Excel or PowerPoint. And we see this a lot with the students here at the School of Public Health, where they'll get data, they'll put it in a column or a row, and then just submit it in some sort of instant graph. There's some stuff to be done to clean it up in order to be able to tell that story. And I'll show you a lot of examples of that in a second. What we're trying to do is make large data sets coherent, and we want to encourage the eye to compare different data. So what I mean by that is, if we're looking at injury rates on campus or something like that, we'd like to be able to compare that with things such as, has the population grown, has the size of the campus grown, or something, and I'll show you examples of all these. Representations of their numbers should be directly proportional to the numerical quantities. I'll show you examples of how that was not done. And then obviously we want to use clear, detailed, and thorough labeling. We want to show variation of data, not variation of the design. And the problem is, with people having so much power on their desktop, that they get carried away in making some of these data displays, and they lose consistency, and that impacts the ability for the viewer to compare information. And now Dr. Tufte really emphasizes this middle bullet here: maximize the data to ink ratio. And his point there is that most of the ink on the piece of paper should go towards talking about the data, not all the stuff around it. And so oftentimes you can encounter graphics that have been made where there's so much ink on the paper that you wonder, where's the data? What is it I'm supposed to be gleaning from this? And you'll see examples of that as we go along here. And most safety data that we share is a time series in nature. It's something over time. So when possible, if you're looking at a blank piece of paper and trying to determine, how do I show this data, it's usually good to turn that piece of paper sideways, and on the x-axis put time, because the viewer sees that line on the x-axis as a time continuum, and that's something we should seize upon, given the short attention span that people have these days, where you show someone a graph and they're trying to figure out what's on the x and y axis. I can tell you that they immediately presume that on the x-axis is time. So take advantage of that before they go into screensaver mode. So some really interesting to me remarks from Dr. Tuffy, that visual reasoning occurs more effectively when relevant information is shown adjacent in our eye span. In other words, we want to show the number of health and safety staff has stayed flat over time, but right next to it is a graph that shows the size of the campus has grown. I'll show you some really powerful examples of that. This is especially true for statistical data, where the fundamental analytical act is to make comparisons. So the key point you should always think to yourself when you're making a data display is compared to what? What this data that I'm sharing with you, what is it compared to? Because that's exactly what your boss and other stakeholders are thinking to themselves as well. So after learning a lot about this, and I did a lot of reading, but also attended some interesting conferences on this, I came back and looked at ourselves. Introspectively, I looked at our operations here, and we were in a situation called DRIP, data rich, information poor. And so I've picked 3 examples of just mundane stuff that we do here. And I want to show you how we were displaying that data. And then I want to show you the revised one. And the first example, I'm going to show you how we fix it step by step. And these have to do with nuisance fire alarms. I suspect everyone in this class has had to deal with nuisance fire alarms. We'll talk about workers' comp, experience modifiers, and corridor clearance. 3 mundane things that safety grapples with. But before we go on, 2 really important comments. One is some of you have probably gone to classes where they talk about how to display data in PowerPoint or something like that. And they'll talk about the size of the font because you're going to be projecting it on a big screen. And yes, that's true. But most really important decisions are typically made where it's 2 or 3 people around a table. So the neat thing about this class that we're doing right now is that you're going to be able to see the granularity of the graphics as they're redone because you're going to be able to see the small print as though it were printed on a piece of paper. So again, all of these things, if I were giving this presentation in a large room and it's projected up on the screen, there will be people who say, wait a minute, I can't read that font, that's too small. Yeah, it wasn't intended to be projected. It was intended to be printed on a piece of paper and then handed to your boss. That's number 1. Number 2 is, like fashion, there's really no right answers. So there'll be individual tastes that will apply, and that's great. But you're going to see some universal rules that will become apparent very quickly as we go through some of these examples. So now, I wish we were in a classroom where we were live and I could ask this, but I'd love to ask the folks here in the virtual sense, does anybody like this graph? Not even knowing what it's about, I suspect the 2 questions I'd like to ask is, does anybody like this graph? And number 2, has anybody ever made this graph? And I think the answer to number 2 is, yeah, some people have done it. But what I really want you to think about is, why don't you like it? And I want you to think about that while I tell you what the story is behind the graph. So here at the Health Science Center, some time ago, we were not over fire safety. That was under the purview of the facilities group. And so what was happening was these nuisance fire alarms were going off, and it was irritating the faculty. And so I got stuck with having to fix this problem. So I sat down with our troopers and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take an epidemiological approach to this. And starting in September, we're going to record the data on the number of fire alarms that we get. And we're going to break them out by the cause of those things. And we're going to track them over time to see if we can find a way to intervene. And so they said, I'm sorry. Question? Hello? Okay. So we're getting some feedback, or maybe can someone mute their microphone or phone? Hello? Okay. So anyhow, a year later, they came back with the data, and it's like, wow, that's great data, properly displayed, because I have no idea what's going on there. So now let's go through and talk about why we don't like it, because I'm seeing comments that people are weighing in. And yeah, I'll tell you, but here's some interesting things. The lines are overlapping. Matter of fact, they shouldn't even be, as far as we know, the events in September are in no way related with the events in October, as far as we know. So this is even the wrong kind of graph. but they're overlapping. The colors don't mean anything. I don't even know what these legends mean, by the way. But the really problematic one, in addition to being the wrong kind of graph, is that the first question I would have is how many of these events did we have in September? And it's up to the viewer to add it up to see that it's 4. And it shouldn't be that way. So now what I want to do is see if we can fix this thing. I'm going to fix it step by step. But here's the really, really important point. At no point am I going to touch the data. All I'm going to do is fix the way the data is displayed. So the data remains constant, okay? So here we go. First thing we're going to do is we're going to, okay, yeah, we got to get a couple people to mute their microphones, please. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is going to change this to a stacked bar graph, okay? So now at least we can see that there were 4 events in September, but the problem is we got this kind of funky X-ray effect around the outside. So let's see if we can double click and take that off. Now we've got a graph that's looking a little better, but here's the thing. The colors are meaningless and the bold overpowers this image. But let's go, it's interesting, this topic happens to be on fire safety. So the color that universally comes to mind when you utter fire is red. So maybe we should use that to our advantage and make this graph a series of reds and associated colors such as yellow or something like that. So we'll change the colors. That's looking a little better here. So yellow is, we're not really sure what spontaneous means yet here. Then we have a contractor-induced alarm. Then we have actual fire, which is red. I think that's appropriate here. And then some maintenance-related activities. But notice again, this bold is overpowering the image. So let's take the bold out. Let's take the lines out. Let's put the legend up in the body of the graph and then also put it in English. And now we've got a pretty good graph here, because we can see that about 2/3 of all of these nuisance fire alarms that are occurring are caused by detector malfunction or dust accumulations. In other words, these detectors are not being aggressively maintained, whether it has to be to blow the dust out of them or maybe switch them out on a regular basis. But about 2/3 of all these events, these annoying events, are caused by detector malfunction and dust accumulation. And thank goodness, only a very few are actually due to smoke or fire. And I want you to compare. So anyone can draw that conclusion, but compare that graph to this. And so the point I guess I'm trying to make is we didn't touch the data, we just touched the way the data is displayed. And this turned out to be quite powerful, and we've made great success. We've had great success with regard to reducing the number of nuisance fire alarms here. Okay, that's number one. Example number one for us at the Health Science Center. Example number 2, this is a graph that I made to track the workers' comp experience modifier. And I don't know if everyone here is familiar with what a workers' comp experience modifier is, but this represents the 6 University of Texas component institutions that are health components, or what they call HRIs, health-related institutions. And an experience modifier, so workers' comp rates, insurance rates, are set by the number of people that work at the institution and the overall payroll. And so that gives you a workers' comp premium rate. And then that rate is adjusted up or down depending on your experience. In other words, how many injuries have you had? And if you have a modifier that's less than 1, so let's say 0.5, that means your premium is 50% lower. Whereas, yeah, we're still getting some backup on folks. If you can mute your microphone, please, that'd be great. I'm not sure. Michelle, can you guys see the microphone that is wrong that's causing that?
Everyone looks muted to me. Sylvia and I are trying to figure this out. It's very weird, Bob. I apologize.
Is Scott's microphone muted?
You know, that is a good question. Let me see if he's still, it looks like he's disconnected.
Sounds like we're getting some construction noise in there.
Yeah, it's very strange. Everyone, please mute your microphones. If you're on your phone, please mute your phone.
Okay, so anyhow, this graph is showing the 6 component institutions that are health related and their associated experience modifier. But the colors don't mean anything. It's not labeled very clearly. And again, this is a graph that I made. But as I reflected on it, my boss only wants to know two things. He wants to know how much we pay and how do we compare to those other institutions. So we revised this graph going in the opposite direction. The previous example I showed you, we went from a line graph to a bar chart. Here, we're going to go back to a line, but watch this. By making it a line chart, we can see the overall trend for all of the component institutions is going down, which is what you want, by the way. And by leaving space here at the end, we can actually label the institutions right here. So all in one fell swoop, we can see the overall trends and the ranking of the institutions. And notice we took the time to put the actual experience modifier number right there, so you don't even have to go over here and read off of the y-axis. Now we put ourselves in orange for a reason, because we wanted us to stand out, to say this graph is about where we stand. But if we were to share this graph with our colleagues in San Antonio, for example, our suggestion would be to make themselves orange and make these some flavor, so to speak, of blues or greens. And the reason we did that is that your mind is telling you, hey, there's something similar about all these guys. That's the reason we use that color palette to our example, or to our advantage there, is that that all of these are a part of the health-related institutions for the University of Texas system. And here we are paying 16 cents on the dollar, which is second best amongst this cohort, with MD Anderson at that time being the best at 11 cents on the dollar. So all of the information that was needed, and by the way, notice this you would not see this part if this were projected on a large screen, but printed out, you can see it. And the reason this is important is because your premium is adjusted based on a 3-year average. And so we wanted to share that information. And this is an important graphic technique. Any of these sort of associated notes, you want to put them in gray, not in 100% black, because it would overpower the image. So this is about a 50 to 60% gray, but still the information is there and can be easily seen when it's printed out on a piece of paper. So, okay, success there. Now, the third one of ours is actually my favorite. So we have a large building. It's 1 million square feet, gross square feet, 8 floors high. And I swear that what happens when the faculty come in and are hired, they sign a contract, and buried in the back of the contract, it says, hey, you must store crap in the hallways, because that's what they do. And so again, I wasn't in charge of this at the time, but the fire marshal came in and wrote, I forgot how many tickets, but we got a bunch of tickets, citations, and it was serious business, and it was time to take this seriously and get it taken care of. So I got stuck with this chore. So what I did was, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to this building and we're going to measure the linear feet of corridor for fire exit purposes on each floor of this building, from the ground floor all the way up to the 7th floor. And it's the same number because the building is mimicked on each floor all the way up. And then we're going to go back, and each month we're going to measure the length of corridor that has crap in it. And we're making a metric here called hallway occlusion. And it's the length of the hallway that's got stuff in it. And we use the term occlusion because the president of the university at that time was a cardiologist, and he understood the importance of occlusion. And then we would work with the faculty and say, do you really need this stuff out in the hallways? Can we help you get it surplused, or whatever the issue was? So we worked with the faculty to actually see if we could get this stuff out of the hallways and get us back into compliance. So a year later, this was the graph they came back with. They worked very difficult. You can see the names of the people who were assigned the different floors. And again, I thought, wow, this is great data. No one has data like this, but the way it's displayed, no one understands what the heck is going on. So I actually sat down and reworked this graph, and I want to show you, or I want you to answer the question, how are we doing on this hallway clearance project? And what's fascinating about this reworked graph is that 30 seconds ago, you didn't even know what hallway occlusion was. But by developing the appropriate metric and then showing the data the right way, you can tell a very compelling story. Now I want to point out a couple of key points here. Number one is, it was really important when I first redid this graph, all I showed was the total occlusion, which was a single line here. And I thought, you know what, that's not telling the story, because it's not showing the individual progress that was being that was occurring on each floor. So I went back and included each floor, but it was really important for the data to be sorted in logical order from the ground floor, first floor, second floor. Imagine if this was all mixed up, it would have been a mess. Notice that we went from light blue to dark blue here. And the reason we did that is because when you look at a topographical map, the light blue indicates, the dark blue is the very depths of the ocean, and the light blue is the shallow water, the highest part. So this is reinforcing in your mind, this is the deepest part, and this is the highest part of the building here. And notice that they all track down, and then a very interesting phenomenon occurred in September. And I'm curious what you think. What magically happened here from September to October? We started to see an increase. It's like, uh-oh, something's going on. And then magically it dropped to 0 in December. And this circles back to my presentation last week about how universities work. And I'm curious if anybody has an idea on what they think happened in that span of September, October, and December to get us pushed over the goal line and get us down to 0. I'll pause here for a second and welcome your feedback. And by the way, it has nothing to do with the holidays.
New Year starts in September 1.
Okay.
So everybody buys new equipment. So they've got to shove all the old equipment out in the hallway.
Oh, well, that's that's an option, but what do you think magically occurred in October that caused it November to drop it to 0 in December? I like the fiscal year relationship. Well, let me tell you what we did. Once we had this reworked graph and we got the data and we saw this uptick in October, imagine this graph with the data chopped off right here. This is when we went to the dean of this respective school and said, hey, we've gone as far as we can. What do you want me to do with this inappropriate stuff that's in the hallway? And it happened to be patient records. And the dean's like, what are you talking about? I said, come on, let's go for a nature hike. And I actually had a map of or the blueprints for the entire building, and I had marked where these consistent things were. We were going each month, and we had put stickers on these items every month and talked to the faculty about this. Well, once the dean actually saw that, number one, the low-hanging fruit's been taken care of, but now we're down to the vital few, the dean took over and said, if this stuff is not removed by the end of November, it will be destroyed. I will take it out personally. And look at that, magically, it went to 0. But the important point here is that we couldn't have pulled that stunt without having this data to show the dean that we had worked collegially with these folks to drive the numbers down. And now we're down to the vital few, and we have the data to back it up, and then they can drop the hammer and the rest of it went away. And you'll notice there's a rebound there, and we continue monitoring. It's never going to be perfect, but we're doing a lot better than we were doing back then. Okay. So although these techniques are powerful, there's some downsides to this. And number one is there's time involved to create and assemble these non-standard graphs, and that may not mesh with work demands. That's true. But the good news is you don't have to do it for every graph that you maintain or all the data you maintain, just the 1 or 2 that you're going to go to the meeting, the important meeting with. And it results in relentless tinkering and artistic judgment. And so people ask me, and I've become a graph aficionado, where might I go to see some other examples of good data displays? And in my travels, I'll tell you the best ones I see is in the Wall Street Journal. I don't read the Wall Street Journal, but when I go, if I'm flying somewhere and there's abandoned newspapers in the airport waiting area, I usually look at the Wall Street Journal just to pay attention to the way they display data. They do a really, really good job. Conversely, probably some of the worst examples I've seen is USA Today. They actually have a name for those charts that they have on the lower fold of the front page of the paper. They're called chartoons, and they violate every precept of good data displays because they'll have number of avian flu deaths and it'll be a bunch of chickens stacked up or something like that, something ridiculous. So if you want to see some really good examples, go look at the Wall Street Journal. You want to see some bad examples, look at USA Today, and then that'll get you heading down the right pathway to having some good data displays. So I'm going to summarize this part. Now we're going to get into some really good examples. So the ability to display data compellingly is the key to desired decision making. So we should always anticipate compared to what. We should maximize the data to ink ratio. In other words, eliminate the unnecessary. And by the way, I want you to note on all of these remade graphs, note this, every one of these graphs that we remade, notice that the background is white. See that? White, white. Okay, so that alone addresses the issue of the data to ink ratio there. Think about what it is you're trying to say, and then if you're grappling with making a data display, print it out and just put it under one of your colleagues' noses and don't say anything, just see what they get from it. It's kind of like writing a fiery memo or email. Don't hit send yet, let somebody else look at it and see what they think before you hit send, and that's a good way to test it. So I'm going to pause here before we get to some real world examples. Anybody have any questions or concerns at this point? Have you grappled with this problem, or are you currently grappling with this problem? I'm just kind of curious. Either unmute yourself or put in the chat. Either way is fine.
No, I appreciate it because I think one of the problems I've had with trying to get initiatives off the ground is making the data compelling. And I think I haven't really compared it to anything. I've just made a point just to show data. So that was a big takeaway for me.
Okay, great. And I'm going to show you some examples here in a second that actually have the comparison aspect in it that will, I think, get you pushed over the goal line there. So thanks for that comment. That's good. Anybody else? Again, let's remember our primary goal here is to help you extort money from upper management. That's the intent of this course. And so one of the secrets here is being able to display data this way. So, okay. All right. So here's what we're going to do. So because this really struck me as being an issue that our entire profession needs to think about, I went out to my colleagues who are EH&S directors and managers across the country and asked them, can you do me a favor and send me the graphs you use to try to tell your story with? I'm very interested in this. And if they look great, that's great. If they don't look great, I'm going to see if I can try to improve them, and I'll send them back to you. So you can either use them, throw it away, or consider them. But I'm just curious to see how is it we as a profession tries to tell our story. And I have literally hundreds of these examples, but I've selected some for a reason. And I'm going to tell you the name of the university. And it's not to pick on the university. This isn't something that's shaming anybody. It's more to show you how prolific the problem is, because it's some pretty impressive institutions that were grappling with the same issue, just like we were. And so your job is to put in the chat box the name of the mascot of the institution. And it'll start off pretty easy, and then it'll get harder as we go along, but it'll be pretty interesting. And I think you'll get a chuckle out of this as we go through these examples. So again, I'm going to show you what they sent me. I'll tell you the story behind the graph, and then I'll show you the revised version, and then you can vote. Do you think it's any better? Do you think it made it worse? Or whatever. I welcome your feedback on that. Okay, so here we go. This first one is a screenshot from my alma mater, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So go ahead and type in for the mascot, and if you get this one wrong, we're gonna have to throw you out of this class, because there's a big basketball game tonight, by the way. So that's really important. So anyhow, the guy there at the time, the safety guy there is Pete Reinhardt. He went on to Yale University. Good guy. I've known Pete for many years. And this is just one screenshot of a 30 or 35 page report that his office created each month to present to their boss to justify their existence on all the stuff that they did. And this one kind of caught my eye for a reason, but they'd set up this program called the Collaborative Laboratory Inspection Program, CLIP program. And this was the data where they went out, and this is the total number of principal investigators they inspected each month, how many didn't have any violations, how many did have violations. And then I know that the spreadsheet was made by their health physicist, because it has here down to the 100th of a percentage point, the percent that didn't have violations and the percent that did. And it actually was quite funny. I was talking with Pete about this, and he goes, you know, you're right. Our HP did make this. I said, they're my people, man. So, okay, so why did I pick this graph or this table? Number one is there's a great quote, whose bread I eat, his song I sing. If you happen to report to a finance person, especially accountants, they like tables. They're very comfortable with tables. But if you want to show this in table form, don't show it this way. And what I mean by that is there's duplicative entries here. This column could be blended together, and these lines could be taken out. So let me show you an improved table version of this. This table is much clearer that we can show in May. We did 94 principal investigators, and we found 56% didn't have any violations, 44% did. Much cleaner. But if we wanted to make this as a graph, we might want to consider it this way, because now we can see the total number of inspections done. The green ones are the ones that didn't have any violations. The red ones are the ones with violations. Okay. And then some of you are bemoaning, well, we're a poor institution. We can't do this stuff in color, especially if we've got to print it out. That's okay. You can do it in black and white too. This is actually what the Wall Street Journal does a very good job at. If you pay attention to the Wall Street Journal, all of it's in black and white, and they use these subtle gray differences. Okay, but here's the deal. One of the dangers with being able to improve your data communications is that it's going to lead to good questioning. And that's what you want to have happen, by the way. The term communicate, the root word there is commune, which means to share or exchange information, not to merely proclaim it. And so I guess what I would do is challenge you, now that we've cleaned this up for Pete Reinhardt and his team, what questions should he be prepared to answer when he shows this graph to his boss? Because now we've got the data displayed well, and since we can do it here on the computer, we'll put it in color. What sorts of questions do you think Pete should be prepared to answer? Because there's a big one that he missed and got caught flat-footed on, and learned an important lesson on this. So what do you think? Go ahead and weigh in. What sorts of questions should Pete have been prepared to answer? Okay, why am the violations? What type of violation? I'm getting some chat in here. What kind of violation? Sure. Why aren't they improving? It doesn't seem to be improving, but that's getting to a key question here. Is the most important question is, are they in the same area? That's kind of getting to it. How many labs do we have? In other words, is this the same labs getting inspected over and over again, or is this just representing 1% each month? And so I would argue that in the title, up there under the heading, it could have said of a total of 2,000 laboratories. Now we're telling a better story here. That in May, we got to 90 something of them, but these aren't the same ones over and over again. But we certainly should be armed with what are the commonalities for what's wrong with the system that's causing us to have this consistent set of violations, and let's see what we can do to get that fixed. Okay, so my caution to you is, if you improve the way you display data, make darn sure you go armed with the answers to the questions that are coming, which will get you your desired result. Okay. All right, second one here. This is from University of Missouri, Columbia. What's the mascot for that one? And I know that this graph was made by the health physics folks because it shows the 3 styles of clothing worn simultaneously. Here's the pants, the shirt, and the jacket. and the guy's name was Peter Ashbrook. And I asked Pete, I said, hey, Pete, did you start out as an HP? And he said, yeah, I sure did. I said, I can tell. That's exactly what it looks like. So anyhow, this is the number of radioactive material packages that they get. And it shows over time what's going on here. But the big problem with this number, the gray in the background, is problematic. And these lines are offensive. And by the way, this automatic formatting by an older version of Excel. But the really big problem with this graph is that this bar and this bar are subsets of this bar. It's the wrong kind of graph. And I see this a lot, by the way, that these 2 lines should be embedded in this line. So let's see if we can clean this up a little bit. And now we've got a much better graph. here's the total number of packages that have been received over these time frames. Here's the ones for medical use, and here's the one for non-medical use. And again, we can do this one in black and white as well. But here's the problem. What I told Peter is that after the experience with Carolina, I told Peter, I said, I can fix this graph for you, but you better be able to answer a really important question. And he says, well, what do you mean? I said, well, if I'm the administrator looking at this graph, I'm going to say, great, how many radiation safety people can we get rid of? So in other words, you might be prepared to say, yeah, we're seeing a decline in the use of radioactive materials, but we're repurposing these people to do X, Y, and Z or whatever. So again, be prepared to answer those sorts of questions. Okay, this one's from Carnegie Mellon University. Anybody know the mascot for that one? It'll be life's gonna get a little more difficult as we go along from here. So the person there at the time was named Madeline Miller. I remember Mad Miller. She was a real nice, good person, very dedicated. She was bemoaning to me, I was up there with their program, and she was saying that they had started this OSHA lab and EPA compliance routine where they were going out and checking all the labs. And she said upper management didn't understand what they were trying to do. And I said, well, Matt, that was her nickname, was Matt. I said, Matt, part of the problem is I'm in the business and I don't know what it is you're trying to do. This graph isn't telling me anything. So let's talk about this graph. By the way, it is a Scotty dog. Their mascot is the Tartans. It's a little Scotty dog that wears a plaid beanie or something like that. So, okay, the yellow bar is the total number of labs. The maroon bar is how many they actually inspected or audited. And the blue is the subset that was actually found to be in compliance. And then there's something else here that I'm not really sure what that is. But anyhow, number one is this the wrong kind of graph because this bar and this bar are a subset of this. But I asked Matt while I was there, I said, well, Matt, what about 2003? What did you guys do in 2003? And she said, well, no, Bob, we didn't do anything. And I said, well, I would argue that's an important story to tell because the reason you're making this graph is to get resources to continue this in 2006. So I said, give me this thing. And when I fly back to Houston while I'm on the plane, let me see if I can fix it for you. And I want you to pay attention to this revised graph for Carnegie Mellon. And I want you to think and maybe chat or tell me, what does the white bar in 2003 tell you? Because I would argue that is the most important bar on this graph for upper management. And she was very resistant. She didn't want to include it. And I said, well, Matt, you can do whatever you want with it. I've already earned my dinner. We were up there doing a peer review and we're doing some other stuff. But I said, if I were you, I would use this graph. So anybody have any impressions on what the bar in 2003 means? Or what does it say to you? Well, it certainly says labs not inspected, but I would argue that it says something a little different. In risk management terms, what it says is that shows Carnegie Mellon's exposure, their risk exposure. We had 263 labs in 2003, and we had no earthly idea what was going on in those labs. And then in 2004, we started going out and doing routine surveillance. We got to 2/3 of the labs. 1/3 had no problems. 1/3 had some sort of problems. And again, another third, we don't know what's going on in there. And then in 2005, guess what? The campus grew. And now we're up to 302 labs. We got to all of them. That's good news. And the bulk of them are in compliance. And only a small number had problems, which we're working on to resolve. We're telling the entire story in a single graph here. And notice that these dotted lines, which are just put in by line draw, notice that the lines and the text around that is not in 100% black. It's in like 70% gray, which doesn't overpower the image. And this graphic was impactful because I sent it back after I convinced her that that 2003 bar was important. Madeline, I told her, print the thing out, and when you go and meet with your boss, lay it on the table and explain. And she called me back, and I could tell she was almost on the verge of tears. She was so happy. She said, Bob, for the first time, they finally understand what it is we're trying to do. And that's when it struck me, because Mad Miller is a good person. They're very competent. They're doing good work there at Carnegie Mellon. But the problem was they had this data, but it was just the way they were trying to display it was not getting the message across. And that really struck me. And that's why it really motivated me to go on this whole endeavor of trying to come up with examples that people could see so that it could improve the way they're trying to tell this difficult story of the value of prevention. Okay, now this one is the worst health and safety graph I've ever encountered. So if any of you that are in this class send me a graph that needs to be fixed in some way, and I send you this one back, you will know that you have substituted in Bob's collection of graphs the worst health and safety graph ever created. Let me tell you where it's from. First of all, it's from the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. So we need the mascot on that. And by the way, there'd only be so many things if you think about it at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. We do a lot of work with the University of Alaska system. We go back and forth there, and it always seems to be in the wintertime. It's the coldest ever been in my life. Yeah, Barry got it right. It's the Nanooks. It's the native term for the polar bears, the Nanooks. And so anyhow, this is data that their risk management group was collecting because they wanted to know what was the average cost of workers' comp claims. And a couple of problems with this graph. Number one is we start at $0.00 up to $45,000.00. Then we have these titles that are known only to the spreadsheet maker, what they mean. This is my favorite one. Striking object, including like you were hit by a meteor, or I don't know what that means there. Lifting, handling, anyhow. So here's a trick. When you have a situation like this and the order of because these are just on these columns that are in the spreadsheet, if the order of these things doesn't matter, then it's not like January, February, March, April, May, then sort them from high to low or low to high. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. By the way, over here is the number of these claims, but this number is so low compared to 45,000, it's buried down here in the x-axis, you can't even read it. So there's no way you can glean any important information out of this graphic. So I said, give it to me and I'll clean it up for you. And lo and behold, here's the revised version. And now, sorted, we can see that the major problem in Fairbanks, Alaska is slips, trips, and falls inside. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on in Fairbanks, Alaska for this one, okay? And so, again, the trick here was to sort it high to low. And by the way, it shouldn't have been a line graph because these things aren't connected here, in other words. So we get this version. And what was funny was I put these lines in it, labeled it this way. It's all great. We get the natural sorting from high to low. And the woman, I sent it back to her, I said, print it out on and hand it to your boss when you go to meet. And she called me back laughing. This was great. She said, Bob, I'd set up a meeting with my boss for an hour. And I went in and laid the graph on him, and he just looked at me and said, buy the darn mats. And that was the end of the meeting. The meeting didn't even last a minute. And there you go. The problem solved. Now you know what to do. So pretty interesting. Okay, this is a trick question because I don't think they have a mascot. This is University of California, San Francisco. And this is injuries of the dental students. It was important to note on here, by the way, the reason there's no data here is that's the beginning of the academic year. I don't think they have a mascot, by the way. They're like a health science center graduate program. And then here we have the number of bloodborne pathogen exposures by either a puncture or by a needle stick or laceration, and they're separated because of whether it's hollow bore or not. But we're going along fine, and all of a sudden we get down here and we're like, whoa, what's going on? Well, this is the total. This is automatic formatting. It was provided by Excel. Don't do this. Don't put the total down here. Let's see if we can fix this. Now we have a cleaner graph because we know we have now the totals up here, 22 events. And then we have the start of the academic year here. And there at the first, in the month of August, we had 7 events broken out by the risk, whether it was non-needle or hollow bore, and then the number declines over time. So a good looking graph there, much better than the one that was provided before. Okay, University of Delaware. Cast your votes for the mascot there. This is the second worst health and safety graph ever made. Lots of problems with this one. They're trying to tell the age-old story that the campus is growing, but safety isn't growing with it. So here we have data on fire extinguishers systems, fire extinguishers, fires, and asbestos projects. That's the things that they're going to measure. 1986 to 96 is 10 years. 96 to 98 is 2 years. 98 to 2003 is 5 years. Down here, that's problematic right there. They've got this in percent, by the way. This is number of fire extinguisher systems. And I know this has to be reversed with fire extinguishers because surely you have more portable extinguishers than you do fixed systems. And then this is my all-time favorite, fire-related incidents. Here we have minus 18, which I think means they sent staff to adjoining campuses to set fires on them so they look better. And then here we have asbestos projects, all problematic. So the best thing we could try to do with this is a technique called small multiples. And I'm going to show you a failed attempt at trying to fix this, but then I'll show you a successful one here in a second. So we tried to break it out where these different types of activities, so here was building fire systems, but we're missing all this data in between. And we could put some lines in there to maybe enhance it, but there's still too much data missing. This one's problematic. But in the meantime, the lead of Delaware contacts me and says, Bob, hold off on that project. This is my big problem for the day. They've got their arm wrestling over the disposal of hazardous waste. And so he's got this graph. He said, I'm going into a meeting. Can you help me clean up this graph? So they've got hazardous waste that's either from administrative departments, renovation projects, or from lab operations. The most important line on this is unfortunately the hardest one to see, which is the total. And so I said, sure, we can fix this up for you. So what we did is we took the gray out, we made the most important line red, and we labeled this stuff at the end. That all looks great. But I said, you know what the problem is? This is all fine, and I can clean that up for you, but I need to know what the units of the y-axis are in. And no, they were going to go to their boss with this, by the way. And this person glibly said, well, Bob, you know, it's in hazardous waste pounds. And I'm like, well, yes, I know what hazardous waste pounds are, and maybe you do, but the people you're going to talk to don't. They speak in the units of dollars. Well, each hazardous waste costs different. Just pick a nominal amount and convert that to dollars. So here's what they did. They sent, okay, Bob, got it. This is what they sent me back. This is classic. So I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. So did you not pick up anything that we had done before with your previous graph, but you just converted this to dollars? So now let's clean it up. And lo and behold, now we got a pretty good graph because we got the total cost for hazardous waste disposal has gone up, largely due to lab operations. And the guy called me back and said, Bob, I went into the meeting and handed out printed copies like you said, and the president turned to the vice president for research and said, pay for this crap. And that was the end of the meeting because they had the right data displayed the right way. So we'll go back to Chapel Hill for a second because it's an interesting graph of trying to show too much. This is workers' comp injuries by type. It's a big jumble. It's very difficult to sort out. But you know you got a problem when the second most prevalent cause of injury is miscellaneous. That means you got a big problem with your data collection mechanism there, which is a story for another day. But in this case, what we did was sort it out by the top three and tried to make this work a little better, where the top three that they were focusing on was fall, strains, and puncture. But by showing the total, you don't see that peak that's occurring here, where you clearly see the peak in the number of injuries reported here. And that leads to some other interventions there as well. This is one of my all-time favorites, University of California, Riverside. We have some California folks here, so maybe someone there knows the mascot of their colleagues in Riverside. And it's actually the Highlander Bears is the mascot. And they have, you know, UC System, they've got the UCLA, they got UC Berkeley, they got some pretty impressive institutions. And when I was out there, there was a bumper sticker at UC Riverside. It was classic on this old VW, and it says, UC Riverside, you weren't our first choice either. I thought that was classic. Anyhow, this is 4 graphs that are on 4 different pages of an annual report. And it's good data, but unfortunately, this is an example of showing variation of the design rather than variation of the data. So what I did was put it in proximity, and now we're going to show a successful use of small multiples. Check this out. Now, I wish we had this missing data, but now we've got campus gross square footage up, student population up, extramural research funding up, EH&S staffing flat, in fact, actually declining. This is very powerful because notice that the years on the x-axis are the same, although your eye goes from one to the other, you can compare. the guy, his name was Ross Grayson, he told me he showed his boss this data, and he got immediate approval to hire 2 or 3 people. I forgot what it was he got, but it was a successful display of data because it told the right story. It had we're going to talk about in the next presentation about the importance of this metric of square footage being really driving the relationship down here as well. Okay, just to show you that this doesn't limit itself to colleges and universities. When I travel, I get to kind of get caught up on some of the journals. And this one caught my eye in the Journal of Environmental Health. This was this big ad for the Chick QuatSafe Food Service Towel Company. I want to draw your attention to that graphic there in the middle. And here it is. They sell a disposable towel that maintains a certain level of quaternary ammonium compound. And here's the level in cotton towels, reused cotton towels. The problem is you have to kind of discern all this information over here in the color coding and the quiz on what one's 60 minutes and what's 45 minutes. But most importantly, and this gets to comparisons where someone had commented on this notion of compared to what, the really important thing is we'd like to know what the FDA standard is for levels of quaternary ammonium compound. And lo and behold, buried up here in the text is 200 parts per million. And that would be really good information to have down here. So we actually teach a class at the School of Public Health Risk Communications, where students have to do projects on communicating orally, communicating in writing, communicating with data like this stuff here, and then communicating through the media. So it's actually a very interesting class. And so here so I gave this to the students and I said, okay, we're gonna have a contest, see if you guys can't rework this graph. And by the way, I have to pause here for a second. The School of Public Health has an elevator, it's 10 stories high. And one day I get on the elevator and I'm in the back and some students get on and some student leans over to another one and says, hey, have you heard Emery's Pimp Your Graph talk yet? And I started laughing to myself. He didn't know I was back there. And I thought, oh, that's what all the students call it, Pimp Your Graph. I thought that's pretty good. Anyhow, so here's the revised version. Small multiples. Notice we've imposed the limit right there. So you can see that the QuatSafe towel stays quite high. Cotton towel degrades over time here, and by 60 minutes it's below the FDA limit. So it's very powerful. Good work. So I said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to send this to the QuatSafe company. So I Googled up the area rep and I told them, hey, these students reworked your graph. You can have it and do what you want with it. But, these are poor grad students. They, boo-hoo. And so I was hoping the guy was going to send us pizzas, but instead he sent us a case of towels. So I brought the disposable towels to class and told the kids, welcome to public health. This is what you get. Okay, this is a real world one here from the Exxon, that event from the Exxon offshore leak, Deepwater Horizon leak. And there was concerns about exposure to benzene over the wellhead at the surface of the water. And this was actually data that was provided by the offending party, by BP Industrial Hygiene, and it was published on the OSHA website. But no one could figure out what the heck this means. It wasn't showed in context, and the media was all over this, and I got dragged into having to try to discern this. So I actually laid it on the students, and this is what they came back with, which I think is pretty nice, because here's these discrete sampling points, but here's the OSHA action level, and here's the OSHA PEL. Now, they can get into debates about exposures to benzene, but this put this data into context by showing these reference lines. And it's also interesting the cycle that occurs, because I'll bet this has to do with weekend data. I'm not sure, but I didn't get a chance to sort that out. So now this is a real world one. This is actually we made back in our, and I'm over employee health, and employee health made this one. Can anybody see a problem with this graph? This has to do with COVID testing. Anybody? This is a really good, I didn't remake this graph because I just told them how to fix it, but does anybody see a problem with this thing? It shows COVID testing by people, if they don't know where they got the exposure, or it might have come from outside, it might have come from work exposure, but the black bar on the top is the total. What they've done is they put the total on top, so it gives the impression that at one point there was 80 positive cases, but in fact there was 40, the total. So be very wary of when you see stacked bar graphs like this, make sure they didn't put the total on top of it. So it was showing things, yeah, it was very misleading, but not intentional. but we've since cleaned it up, and I need to hunt down the improved, because I get one of these each week, and I just got to put an improved version in there. Okay, so last but not least, as I go around the countryside talking about this stuff, people send me their graphs, and so I got a couple to wrap up this part of the presentation, which are actually hilarious. First thing you do, each of you are authorized to go spend some time on tylervigen.com. It's a very interesting data set. It's hundreds of data sets that you can look to see if there's correlations, of which they don't make any sense. So here's a graph that shows the number of people who drowned in swimming pools. It correlates very nicely with the power generated by nuclear power plants. In our current environment, then people would say, oh my God, we have to tear down nuclear power plants because people will drown, right? Here's the number of math doctorates awarded as compared to the amount of uranium stored at nuclear power plants. And you go on and on. You can waste half a day on looking at these spurious correlations. It's actually quite funny. You can use it to your advantage. Here's some other ones. I love this one here. People who will find you on Facebook. The blue is high school people you hated. The red is college people you hated. The yellow is work colleagues you hate. And then the green is actual friends. This one's my favorite graph here is this shows your, here's what you were hoping to do with, here's your intended career path, and here's your actual career path. And the yellow part is why you drink. I love the y-axis is prestige, and this is time from birth to death. It pretty much captures everything in there. This is where do all my socks go? This is when the dryer starts, and then this is when it's finished, and I still can't answer that conundrum. This next one's kind of depressing. It's the highest paid public employee by state. I know you find it difficult to believe that the football coach would be the case here in Texas, along with many other states. I grew up playing hockey, so I'm interested to see that New Hampshire actually is the highest paid person as the hockey coach. And then this one's interesting to me that Nevada, it's the med school plastic surgeon is the highest publicly paid employee. And draw from that what you will. So, how about this? The world's most accurate pie chart. This is pie that I have eaten, and this is pie I have not yet eaten. You can't get much clearer than that. And then last but not least, these are things that reportedly taste like chicken on a chickeniness scale, with KFC ranked lowest, which I thought was classic there. So, okay, that's all I got for you. Any questions or concerns? Let me stop sharing here and ask if there's any concerns or questions about data displays. Now, I will wrap up with an offer that if you find yourself grappling with with your own data displays and you can't figure out how to do it, if you wish to de-identify it and email it, it's great to lay on the students as an exercise for them to learn, because that's what they're going to do when they graduate. They're going to be out there doing these types of projects. And for them to do real world learning is a really great experience. So I don't know if some of you are grappling with this right now or maybe in the future, but before we switch to the next presentation, don't know if you have any questions or comments, either by chat or by audio. And it looks like Scott has made it back. Did you, Scott, you made it through employee health, new employee orientation?
Yes, sir. All is good. Everybody's safe. We've got about 10 minutes until our scheduled break. If you guys want to ask any questions or have some conversation here.
Do we want to take the break now and then before we flow into the?
Yes.
Well, let's see questions for any questions or comments now, and then we can take a break and then we can come back. Yeah. All the way. Okay, let me get to the chat.
Yeah, David Ortega just put in a note here. Love all the ways that we can format a graph to display information clearly and effectively. Just need to dedicate the time. So completely agree. This does not happen easily. I mean, you need to spend some time there. This is an art and a little bit of science involved. And so there's some tricks of the trade that Safety Bob has shared with you guys, but sometimes it takes a couple passes. And I always like to print these things out and give them to some colleagues, some lay persons, if you will, who haven't seen the data, so they can look at it and say, I know what's going on, or not, and then make some changes accordingly.
And by the way, when Scott covers our annual report, you should pay special attention to the formatting of the graphs, because that's what's at the end of the day. I mean, I should tell you, by the way, once you learn how to do, I will tell you that once I learned how to do this, we have gotten everything we've asked for. I'm not exaggerating. When I go up on to the Tower of Power, and lay out the stuff in the data this way. And then Scott will talk about the annual report here in a little bit. You have to promise to use your new superpowers only for good when you go out, now that you're armed with this information. Okay. All right. Well, I've got 10:05. So do you want to take a break here? 10:05 Houston time.
So we have a 15-minute break scheduled because we're starting it early. Let's come back at 10:20 Central Standard Time, and we'll get started with the second half of today's presentations. So 10:20 Central Standard Time. See you guys in a few minutes.
Got it.
Okay, guys, it's 10:20 Central Standard Time. Let's go ahead and get restarted here. Safety, Bob.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so the second part of my contribution this morning is to talk about this notion of the public health logic model, but I want to back up a little bit and describe this effort that we've undertaken in cooperation with SHEMA, the Campus Safety Association, on what we call the vital statistics, because it weaves quite nicely into the notion of the logic model. And then I'll show you some interesting statistical comparisons, which will flow quite nicely into what Scott's going to cover in the next segment there. So, well, first I want to recognize our colleagues that have been involved in this collective effort. I'm going to talk about 3 practical realities that we all face, and you can just put in the chat box, amen, when I read each of these to you. I'm going to summarize some of the evidence-based EH&S benchmarking models that we've completed to date. We'll talk about our key performance indicators, and then I'll wrap up with a brief discussion about this notion of Vital Statistics 3. We've actually done 2 of these surveys so far. We're getting ready to unroll Vital Statistics 3, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Before I go on, just want to acknowledge our colleagues, Jing Wang, Bruce Brown, Seth Parker, Jason Shu, Jeanette De La Rosa Ducat out at California State University. No, she's at University of California, Riverside. O2 Yin Yang, and then all of the folks with SHEMA at the Community of Practice for Research and Survey have all been very helpful in this ongoing effort. So 3 realities. Number 1 is, I wish someone had told me this a long time ago. Number 1 is universities compare a lot of things. Universities sit down and they compare revenues, the appearance of their campus, the number of students, the number of faculty, research productivity, athletics, student entry, grade point, SAT scores, revenues from tech transfer, blah, 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 blah. They do it all the time. And yet there are some within our profession assert that EH&S programs cannot be compared. I would argue that's ridiculous. They are compared just like everything else that universities compare. And there's some great quotes down here. While individuals may be insolvable puzzles, in the aggregate, they become mathematical certainties. My favorite quote down there is, comparison is the mother of insight. So whether you like it or not, comparisons are being made all the time, and we need to be prepared with data to be able to say where we stand. And you darn sure want to take the lead on that rather than having some auditor sent in from the outside who doesn't have a clue what EH&S does to do it for you. So that's reality number 1. Reality number 2 is the constancy of change. I was up speaking in front of a large group one time. It was a bunch of campus safety people, as a matter of fact. And I asked the question, how long have you personally reported to the person you report to? I'm not talking about your position. I'm talking about you. How long have you reported to the person that you report to? And it was interesting because I've asked this question many times to other groups as well. About 80% have reported to the person they currently report to for less than 5 years. And for 25%, that's less than a year. So if you flip that data around, that suggests that most practicing safety professionals can expect to have between 6 and 30 different bosses over a 30-year working career. And that data is held out about true, by the way. I've been here 29 years, and I've had 6 different bosses already, and since I've been here. And so change is going to occur, particularly in universities. So not only do we have the challenge of telling our story of prevention, but we have to be able to tell it successfully, repeatedly, because of the constant change that occurs within the university. Now, if you think about it, think about the impending retirement of EH&S leaders in the next 5 years. So the bad news is there'll be a loss of vast institutional knowledge, experience, and wisdom. But the good news is there'll be fresh ideas and perspectives, and there'll be new invigorated energy, but also there'll be comfort with technology. So there could be a very exciting set of changes that occur in the future, but change is going to occur whether you like it or not. And then the third thing is this notion of measures for compliance rather than measures of performance. And I'll just take one example here for the sake of time, but safety people are hardwired, and we're actually required regulatorily to record the data on pounds of hazardous waste generated. We are not required to record the data on the number of pickups it took to get to those pounds of hazardous waste, but that's a very important number to have to be able to tell upper management about the effort that's needed to go around and actually safely manage that waste. So I would suggest that health and safety people need to think about the data that we have to collect for compliance, but there's also data we have to collect for performance as well. And I encourage you to think about that one long and hard. So while those things change, others do not. And as Scott will go into greater detail on this, but what we've realized over time is that the 4 key performance indicators for university health and safety efforts. Now, I'm going to be clear on this, and Scott will get into it in more detail, but the 4 big ultimate outcomes of a safety effort for a university is the frequency and severity of reported illnesses and injuries and property losses, then regulatory compliance by external agencies, the finances, and measured client satisfaction. And when I'll get into it here in a second, but again, Scott will reinforce it. Some of these things might be out of your realm of control, but yet are really important to be able to say, how is the university doing holistically with regard to its safety enterprise? And so what will change over time is how we frame the information that we collect. For example, if our new boss is an attorney, maybe we put compliance first. The next, maybe we're reporting to HR, maybe we put client satisfaction first, but we'll worry about that later. But we do have to understand that the change is certainly occurring. So the great paradox we encounter here is that successful safety programs function largely in the realm of prevention. On a good day, nothing happens. But the perspective of some key stakeholders can be that EH&S is making nothing happen. In other words, we're an impediment to progress for the organization. And hence, that's why it's so important for EH&S to improve our ability to tell our story armed with meaningful and relevant data. Now we get to the logic model. Public health loves logic models, and they consist of inputs and outcomes. So stay with me here. Each institution that's represented in this class has a set of institutional inputs in the form of EH&S staff and the associated EH&S budget. That's the inputs that the institution puts in hopes that some outcomes will occur. And here are the ultimate outcomes. At the end of the day, we want to make sure we have a low number of reported illnesses, injuries, and fatalities for the entire population at risk, students, employees, visitors, and the like. We also want to reduce or eliminate the number and amount of property losses due to, let's say, fire, water leaks, theft. We also want to reduce the amount of environmental releases like hazardous air and hazardous waste, air, water, and the like. We want to have very positive outcomes from the results of regulatory inspections. And then we want to have measured client satisfaction, not reactionary complaints in the elevator, but systematically measured client satisfaction. And Scott, did you cover that? Did you go over that the last session? Yeah, okay, so we have to talk about that. So we've got inputs on the left, we've got outcomes on the right, and then in the middle, but let me go to this color coding thing because this is really important. Notice that under the program outcomes, the colors change. And the reason is because for some safety programs, the data resides in different pots. So for example, the number of reported injuries for students may reside in student health. I don't know. It's in our peer reviews, we see this sometimes. The number of employee injuries or illnesses resides in employee health or somewhere else. Visitors may reside in legal. The amount of property losses may be in risk management or facilities. And measured client satisfaction may be something HR does. So the point is, is that some of this data may reside in different pots, but it's up to health and safety to bring it together in order to tell the story. What is the holistic view of how the safety enterprise is doing for University X? Now, a really interesting quote here. Not everything that gets measured matters, but what matters absolutely should get measured. And that's those items that I just described for you. Now, this middle column is all the stuff, all the activities that health and safety undertakes in hopes of achieving those outcomes. And so this is a kind of a subtle difference that Scott will speak to, is that the key performance indicators are really the ultimate outcomes, the performance of how the safety, holistically, the safety program did for the university. What I see is a lot of safety programs that measure their activities, which is important. It's important to say how many lab inspections you did and how many protocols you reviewed and that sort of stuff. But that's really an indication of activities. That's not a measure of actual outcomes. So while it's important to have data on these activities and efforts, keep in mind that there are these key performance indicators, which are the ultimate outcomes of the institution. Okay, so now what drives, what we were very interested in is, what is it that drives the inputs for the safety enterprise at a university? And when we were doing the EH&S Academy live, we would have a room full of 30 people from all over the place, and we would ask them, who are you, where are you from? Kind of like what we did last week. And we'd ask them, how big is their institution? And we'd wind up with varying measures of bigness, whether it was how many buildings, how many students, how many employees, how many acres, blah, 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 blah. And we became very intrigued by this. So we wanted to know statistically, what is the driver? And I'll show you the data here in a second, because they were in a situation where in God we trust, all others bring data. So we're actually going to bring data and show it to you. And it turns out that the major statistically significant predictor for EH&S inputs is size in the actual unit of total net assignable square footage, a number that probably half the people in this class don't even know off the top of their head. So the most important number that you ought to know is total net assignable square footage. I'll get into complexity here in a second, but that's really the subset of that square footage that's assigned as research laboratory square footage. I'll explain what I mean by that. And then experience, we know that if a certain area or certain institution experience something bad, that may influence the amount of inputs that are put into an organization, but that ranks lower than these other major drivers here. Now over here, what your bosses are doing and my boss is doing is they're doing comparisons. How are we doing with regard to these ultimate outcomes amongst our peers, and what are valid benchmarks? And so that's happening all the time. And so the question we had, is there a relationship between inputs and outcomes? Now, that's a really intriguing question. The problem, and we actually did the analysis, the problem is the sample size here for the University of Texas system is only 14. So it's very difficult to get a statistically significant relationship where we looked at, and this is publicly available data, the EH&S budget and staff, and then looking at the number of employee injuries as an outcome, because that's publicly available data. There's a clear inverse relationship, but statistical significance couldn't be proved because the N is only 14. But with larger, if we collect more data on this, we could actually get to a statistically significant relationship. So knowing about the square footage thing, what Jing Wang did, I gave him this project where we got data, a variety of data points. It was 103, I think, observations. And this is an interesting graph, a scatter plot that shows the total net assignable square footage of these universities that participated in the number of FTE, reported FTE in EH&S. And you can see there's a general relationship, but there's some scatter there. And it turns out the scatter has to do largely with the research intensity of these various institutions. So he did multiple regression analysis. And if you can remember way back when you're in classes, what an R squared value is, it's normally expressed in a percentage. And the higher the R squared value, the stronger, the better explanation you have for the dispersion of the data on that scatter plot. So here we have an R squared value just for total campus square footage of 48%. That's actually pretty good. In public health, you don't see that very often. Then if we break it out for lab and non-lab square footage, it improves the model. But then it turns out that it's log normally distributed. So we get all the way down to here. So if we know just the total square footage and the lab square footage, we have an R-square value of 71%. That's very powerful, by the way. And then we can ask, do you have a med school or a vet school? And do you have BSL-3 or higher? Here we have an R-square value of 80%. So if we can just get some basic parameters, and I get a call a week about this, where it'll be a new administrator. So somebody newly gets hired at University X. Somehow they got my name and they said, under my portfolio, I've got several things, but one of them is safety. I have no idea what they do. And I have no idea how much they're supposed to have. How much of this stuff am I supposed to have? And that's what's kind of made us famous, so to speak. And at least we can speak to the inputs by using this model to say, with an R-square value of 80, we can get you in the ballpark for the staffing of the program. And we got some other models as well. So for the Wang model here, we just need to know the non-lab total net assignable square footage, the lab square footage. I'm going to show you the percentages here in a second. A dichotomous variable, do you have a med school or a vet school? And then do you have BSL-3 operations? And there's the actual formula if you want to do it yourself. Okay. Now, learning about the square footage, I thought, that's kind of interesting. And some of our colleagues were having trouble finding some of the data. So I said, here, just do me a favor. Just send me your total net assignable square footage and your EH&S budget. And lo and behold, we got this very interesting bimodal histogram, but it's a very tight range here. But it's skewed to the left here, but it's on the very low end. If we take these are 5-cent increments here, by the way. So we're roughly 10 cents per square foot per year, all the way up to about 75 cents per square foot per year. But we can chop this tail off because I happen to know what institutions they are. But if we get back here to this group, it's really interesting that we see a peak here around 40 cents per square foot, and it turns out around 20 cents per square foot. And lo and behold, this has to do with the lab density. What percent of the total square footage is assigned as lab square footage? And this is somewhere around perhaps 5%, and this is about 15%. So if you split the difference, you get in here about 30 cents per square foot. So when I get a call from a new administrator, chief business officer, and they don't know anything else about their campus except their total net assignable square footage, I can tell them, multiply it times 30 cents per square foot per year, and you'll get in the ballpark pretty darn quick. Okay? And this is more elaborate. This is with Bruce Brown's thing. And what I want to do is just show you, I don't want to bore you with all the gory details here, but I do want to show you the modeling. This is 118 observations. And all we need to predict EH&S staffing is the total net assignable square footage and the total institutional expenditures. And then similarly, same thing for the budget, the EH&S budget. All we need is square footage and then total institutional expenditures. And then if we sort out just for the academic Association of Academic Health Centers, which means you have a med school and some other graduate health school like nursing or school of public health, look, the regression model shows that all we need is total net assignable square footage. That's it. Same thing for staffing and for budget. So now this is what Seth Parker's project here. We revisited some of this data. What I want to pay attention to is how tightly this dispersion is for lab density. This is the research square footage divided by the total institutional net assignable square footage. And look at that, it only ranges from like 5% up to 13%. So I've become a pretty good predictor of square footage for campuses and the lab density piece. And it's a very tight range between 5% and maybe 15%. It's quite interesting there. And as you well know, for the labs, that's where you have all the exotics, radioactive material, infectious agents, hazardous chemicals, and the like. So if we summarize all that information, what I want you to pay attention to is look how many times, and now we're up to another model in here as well. Total net assignable square footage is king. So the take-home message here is you should know your total net assignable square footage because that's king. The green all say something to do with the research square footage. It's just captured in different ways, whether it's research net assignable square footage or research expenditures, but some indication of the lab density. So that's our next project, is we're going to work on that. So here's a real world example. I get a call, I actually got this call. They said their institution is a 5 million net assignable square footage and they're 900 million in total institutional expenditures. So I tell them, okay, 30 cents per square foot per year, that's 1.5 million in budget. And then if we use our most recent vital statistics model, look how close that is, 1.56 million and 16.7 FTE. So just very simple comparisons, we're getting pretty close. But now they say, oh, by the way, we're a member of the AAHC, which means they have a medical school and let's say graduate school of nursing. Look at the bump up. It bumps up by about 30, 35%, both the expenditures and the staffing. So again, these comparisons are very powerful because it allows upper management to say, okay, on average, we got about the inputs right, or maybe the inputs are quite low, who knows? But now we got to look at the outcomes. So you can't look at just part of the equation, you got to look at both, okay? So at the end of the day, people, at least that live in hurricane regions, know that when the hurricane's coming or forming, there's all these different models that can come up. You know, there's the NOAA model and there's the European model. But at the end of the day, people often ask, well, how precise can it be? Well, I know that at least the hurricane's not coming in the Gulf, and I know that it's going to kind of go in that general vicinity, but it's going to rattle around. So in the same way with these predictor models, you know, how accurate can we actually get? There's variations on definitions of what an EH&S program consists of and on and on and on. But in general, what leadership wants to know is, are our inputs on par with what the industry average is? And now let's start looking at our outcomes and see how our outcomes are doing there as well. So we should stand ready to be prepared to speak to both of those. I get this question all the time. Is this work published in a peer-reviewed journal? The answer is yes. It just got published in February of this year. Here's a screen capture of the actual paper. It's in the American Chemical Society Journal of Chemical Health and Safety, which, by the way, is indexed in PubMed. So it's certainly recognized, and your bosses will appreciate that. And then turns out that these dissertations that some of the students actually produced are also available on the digital commons, which means you can go back to the root data for how those formulas were derived. So why is this all important? Well, this is a really important graphic that you ought to make. It's probably one of the more impactful ones I made. Once we knew that square foot was king, I sat down and said, okay, let's look at the utility bill for this university and divide it by the square footage it serves. And lo and behold, we spend $5.38 per square foot per year for utilities for the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston. For facilities, inclusive of the staff and also all the supplies that are needed, but also the service contracts and the like, we spend almost $3 per square foot per year for facility services. For police and IT, we spend about $1 per square foot. Contract housekeeping, 58 cents per square foot. Insurance premiums, interestingly, about 50 cents per square foot. And environmental health and safety, 45 cents per square foot. We are cheaper than contract housekeeping. So when the administrative pinheads come circling around and say we got to cut budgets, which inevitably they will, I can whip out this chart and say, look, we are cheaper than contract housekeeping, plus we have a very good customer service reputation. If you want to save money, why don't you focus on things such as utilities around here, because that's where we're really paying out. And that's really proved to be quite powerful. Now, Scott will talk about these key performance indicators, and this is what we build our annual report around, and he'll go into more granular detail there. But I just want to touch on now blending in both the data collected and how it's displayed. Now, you saw a previous version of this, but in our annual report, we show total number of first report of injuries by the entire population at risk. Here it is for employees, here it is for medical residents, and here it is for students. And notice what's really interesting, this year, we saw an increase in the FY15, an increase in employee reports, but a decrease in medical residents and students. And so we have to dig into that and find out what the heck's going on. Why are we seeing an increase? But you can see the total line went down, but the total line is due to this and not due to this. That's an important thing for us to be able to answer those questions. Now, this one really ties it all together because it's a good graph, but it also ties in the money piece. So here is our total institutional square footage, the top of this bar. The dark blue is the research area, which represents about, say, maybe 13% of the total square footage. And if we use the model for the cost per square foot, this is the total amount that it would cost to manage the safety program. And the green is what the money we actually got. Now, here's the important subtlety. Notice the dark green, that portion was declining over time. But once we were able to make the case and show that as the institution grows and this portion of the institution grows as well, that the costs go up, and we were able to reverse that trend. And you'll see the institutional allocation went up. Upper management began to understand the story we were trying to tell. We still have a gap, and we have to be able to answer the question, what's not happening? What is it you're not doing because you don't have that money, which we have. But overall, the way that we've got the right data, the way it's displayed is very powerful, and it's actually served us well. Another interesting thing we can do is compare our data to national data. So you can actually go and get injury data for North American Industrial Classification System for hospitals and for universities. I thought we would have fallen somewhere in between, but lo and behold, we're actually below both. That's very, very powerful. And then this is the same line over here compared with some of the best in industry, best in class safety programs at Corning, DuPont, and Dow. So that's very powerful for upper management to see that we're hanging there with best in class safety programs as per the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Okay, so what we're looking at doing in the future is working with SHEMA to encourage the membership to provide, again, this small subset of key vital statistics. All we need to get from people to participate is we have to get the name of their institution, but we have to strike that out later. And the reason we need the name is because there's some publicly available databases that we can access. What's not publicly available is the total net assignable square footage, the number of EH&S FTE, and the EH&S annual expenditures. So if we can get people to contribute those 4 elements, then we can match them up with the publicly available data and revisit this, all of the associations and correlations there, which I think it benefits all of us as we move forward. I'd like to remind people, I get a lot of people calling me and telling me what I should do, but we got to remember we're an all volunteer army here. So it's up to all of us to contribute and to actually tell our story. And I think these results would benefit the entire profession. So at the end of the day here, the key denominator is total net assignable square footage. Use this metric to your advantage now. I guarantee you everybody else around the C-suite is speaking in square footage. Think about these key performance indicators. Some of them you'll have, some of them you have to get from somebody else. But again, this is, Scott will get into this in a second. And then in our setting, change and comparisons are inevitable. We should take the lead so that we have evidence-based, rational comparisons that are made on a consistent basis. And then I part with this comment here that if you have, if you're skeptical about this work or approach, by all means, we welcome your feedback. But I would just throw in this one caveat. I would just ask that you accompany your comments with any evidence or data to the contrary. I get people that turn their nose up at this, but they don't produce any data to the contrary. So what I'd like to do is see the data. And this typically comes from people who the models say you're overstaffed, by the way. I know you find that hard to believe. But as we would welcome the opportunity to compare and evaluate this information in a thoughtful, scientific manner, which is conducive to the environment in which we operate. So some of you will, just inherent to the beast, some of you will be understaffed. They'll be all happy. Some will be perceived to be overstaffed, but they better be able to explain why, because they may be doing different tasks. But they also need to be speaking to the outcomes, not just the inputs there. So I welcome your commentary on that, and I am done, and I'll stop sharing and ask if there's any questions, concerns, commentary, either unmute your mic or chat, join in the chat. Hopefully what you've learned this morning is how to display data and what sort of data you should be collecting, and how do you match it with some key institutional parameters that resonate to upper management. Do I have a list of programs and tasks including EH&S? What an EH&S is? Yes. Matter of fact, we have an online calculator that is part of that paper, and we've gotten a few comments that we've taken the online calculator down for a second because we're making some tweaks to it. But in the intro to that calculator, it actually gives what we define in these projects, the traditional EH&S. So traditional EH&S would be such as occupational safety, radiation safety, biosafety, some portion of the environmental management group. With regard to fire safety, the typical, it may not be the fixed systems, but it'd be the portables, it would be the fire drills, the training, that sort of stuff. So just the traditional EH&S. The things that aren't in there would be risk management, insurance, employee health, that sort of thing. Each university is a little different, but you get the idea. You get the general gist of what we're looking at for an EH&S program. Hope that helps. Sure. Any other questions or comments?
Bob, do you say, is employee health the same as occupational health to you?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Okay, and you guys don't have that?
We have it under our purview, but we didn't include it in the modeling.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Anything else? Again, you got to use your new superpowers only for good. So did you guys get to see the little YouTube video with the hats, by the way? People got to see them. No. And that was kind of an interesting add-on when they were making that little video. Okay, perfect.
Thanks, Safety Bob. I'll take over from here. I will say that we have had a very unique access to a very talented individual who happens to reside at our School of Public Health, who's helped us to make these safety videos. And we've got him engaged in the creation of a variety of safety-related videos that we're going to use for our websites, for training purposes. And he's been a remarkable resource. I would imagine many of you have created your own safety videos over the course of time. We have as well, but this gentleman has brought a very professional twist to all of this, and it's been a pleasure to work with him. So we're having fun making our videos. Okay, we're going to switch gears now, unless there's any other questions or discussion, and we're going to talk about our annual report. So what you're going to see here over the next couple of slides is really a culmination of what Safety Bob has been talking about over the last two presentations. And this short PowerPoint, which is only 3 slides long, you guys don't have access to. It's something brand new that we just created, but it's really an introduction to our annual report that we're going to show you, and you have access to our annual report through the Canvas site. But before I dive into the annual report, a few things that we wanted to point out to make you aware of as we go through the information. First thing is, we've thought long and hard about the format in which we use to convey the information within the annual reports. We see many example reports from other EH&S programs that write long narratives about their efforts throughout the course of a year, which is fine if that works for them, but we chose not to do that. We use a PowerPoint presentation template to display different graphics and information within the text that we feel is an effective way to communicate. Bob and I often give these presentations where we're sharing the information within our annual report, so this PowerPoint format works well in that regard as well, but it's not too text dense, if that makes sense. We absolutely take time to affirm that the 3 key missions of the institution are supported by our activities. So we highlight that throughout the course of the annual report. That's really important to ensure that we are aligned with and not resistant to the achievements of those different things that we do here at UT Health with the teaching, research, and clinical care activities. The 4 key performance indicators, of which were just reviewed by Safety Bob, are obviously highlighted throughout the report. And so what we really have excelled on in terms of being able to convey important information within the report is the way that the information is displayed and communicated so that just about any stakeholder who looks at this can make sense of it. And that includes our campus president, our boss, who is the executive vice president over research. That's where our department reports up through, as well as our own internal departmental staff and stakeholders across our campus, and external stakeholders like yourselves, people who we provide this to share our approach. I always tell people that what we've put together here is not gospel. So please take this and make it your own if you choose to create an annual report going forward, or if you already have an annual report in some form or fashion, you could hopefully glean some ideas and tips from the way that we convey this information What's important is that when we display our achievements from the fiscal year, that we do this in an effective data display manner. And then following each of those data points, we discuss what that means and what we're going to do about those key takeaways over the next year. So the upcoming fiscal year, we're able to make our departmental and program specific goals based upon the information that's contained within the report. And that really helps to keep us focused and to communicate the importance of the information or the goals that we've created with our own staff. So we do keep a compendium of annual reports on our website that we maintain for the department, so you can actually see over the course of time how things have changed. Although I will admit that our IT folks, specifically the people who manage our website, will contact us occasionally and say, hey, some of the links that you have in the report, or maybe some of the outdated logos that still exist, need to be taken down. And so we've chosen not to put all of our annual reports going back to the beginning of time on here, but the last couple of years you can find on our webpage. And then the litmus test here really has been, for us at least, that this annual report has endured the test of time. We find it to be an effective way to present our information. We've had 5 campus presidents rotate through our institution over the course of time since we first started creating this annual report, of which we've been presenting this to. And we've had 5 executive vice presidents for research that we report up to who have endured this as well. And each one of them, we've been able to show what it is that we do in an effective manner to be able to, thank goodness, continue to get the staffing and resourcing that's needed to effectively do the things that we need to do to keep our people healthy and safe on our campus. So just a few introductory notes there that we wanted to share before diving into the report. So let me get the annual report up here now, which we're going to share, and you'll have access to in the Canvas site. For some reason that share didn't work. Are you guys seeing anything yet? Let me try that one more time. Sorry, guys.
Not yet, Scott.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay. So we, as I told you, put this in a PowerPoint presentation format. I'll go through the slides. I'm not going to go through every slide in detail, just for the sake of time. But we each year look at the way that we present this data in terms of the nice, crisp look. We do change it up each year to refine certain things, put a new logo on it. And even as we published our FY21 report, which I'm about to show you, this logo is now out of date. So next year's is going to be a new logo. But we dive right in here and convey upfront that we are aligning all of the things that we do within our departments to align with the institutional mission of teaching, research, and service, and that the 4 key performance indicators are aligned with this as well. And we also dive in at the end of our annual report to show how we go above and beyond to serve the community and so forth. Our current organizational chart is something that we decided to share within the annual report because people often ask us how we are organized and aligned. And although you can find this information elsewhere, we chose to include it in our annual report so you can see each program, how we're aligned with our different expertise within the department. And this includes both the EH&S functions as well as the risk management and insurance, emergency management, and occupational health functions within the department. Right up front, we want everyone to know how proud we are of our department staff for maintaining a safe and healthy work and learning environment throughout what has been the most challenging pandemic situation that we could have ever imagined. As I always tell everybody in our department, this has been the most exciting, challenging, and utterly exhausting time periods in our entire professional careers. I don't think anybody would argue with that, but as we've learned, we've had services that we've had to decrease throughout the pandemic that we've had to put on pause or eliminate altogether. We've had to maintain many of our normal operations to keep people healthy and safe for compliance reasons. et cetera. And then we've had an entire truckload of additional tasks that have been put on our plate as a result of the pandemic situation to best serve our institution. And so we've been able to display this in a table format outside of this report to show not only our staff, but other stakeholders, including our leadership, how those services have changed over the course of time with the pandemic. But importantly, our staff have been on site the entire time, providing what I call meritorious service and dedication to the institution and the people that work and learn here at UT Health. So I always like to make sure that people recognize the efforts and that the health and wellness of our own departmental staff is of paramount importance as we go through the long tail of this pandemic. We do summarize here some of the key things that we've done above and beyond the normal call of duty to serve the organization. I would encourage you guys to think about how you've done this as well, especially if times get tough going forward with budgets and things like that, to show the value of your programs in terms of the ways that you've served your own respective organizations. So keep a running notes on all of this, and if you choose to put in your annual report, even better. So I'm not going to go through this entire list, but I can tell you we've been doing things with the procurement of supplies and personal protective equipment. We've supported the vaccine effort here on campus and serving the community for vaccinations. We've done a ton of additional training and respiratory fit testing. We've participated in research grants that have been specific to the COVID-19 efforts. We've been involved in the establishment of a brand new institute called the Texas Epidemic Public Health Institute that's being run out of our School of Public Health, and so forth and so on. But I'll let you read through those in your own time. But putting all that up front in our annual reports, I think has served us well. You'll recognize these 4 KPIs. These are what we hang our hat on for our inputs, activities, and ultimately these KPI outcomes that we communicate. And the next set of slides go over each one of these and what it means to us. And again, remember that playing it forward, we talk about what this means in the next fiscal year going forward. So starting out with losses, you'll recognize some of the graphics that we're about to display, but we convey information about losses related to personnel, so how many people get hurt on our campus, and some additional information about those accidents and injuries, and then property losses. So those that are covered by our property insurance or those that might be retained losses. This is the graphic you've already seen with our updated FY21 information. What's important to note is that in FY19, we made it an administrative change to roll our medical residents into become employees. So I won't get into the details of why that occurred, but they are now considered to be employees. So that high risk group that we know has a high propensity for bloodborne pathogen related exposures, needle sticks, cuts and scrapes in the clinical setting is now in the employee base, which has implications in terms of our workers' compensation coverage for that group. But overall, our accident and injury rates remain remarkably low. In fact, we continue a downward trend overall over the course of time, despite the fact that just over the last couple of years, we've had a significant increase in overall headcount on our campus. So each one of these accidents and injuries that's reported to us is listed here. We have to remember that each one of these was a real event involving a person, often some pain and anguish involved with these incidents. We have to be respectful and empathetic of each and every one of these. Our department's responsible for investigating each and every injury report that gets submitted, so we understand what happened, why, what the root cause was, and we can implement preventative actions from there. Taking the subset of claims or first reports of injury, should I say, that were submitted by employees, we parcel out those without medical claims and those with medical claims, and we're able to keep those with medical claims reasonably low among our employee base. When we compare our accident and injury rates to the NAICS codes for hospitals and universities, of which as an academic health campus, we're kind of a blend of both of those, we are underneath or lower than both of the national averages for hospital and university work settings. When it comes to the workers' compensation experience modifier, essentially the amount of money that we pay for workers' compensation coverage, we remain second lowest or second best, if you will, among the UT system health institutions at 0.064. That means we pay 6.4 cents on the dollar compared to the industry average of 1 for workers' compensation coverage. That means our premium is favorable because of the good safety performance on our campus. For those of you who are not familiar with the experience modifiers, they're essentially calculated based on head count, incident frequency, and incident severity. So this outcome is really important for us in terms of cost savings. When we look at retained losses, these are losses that are not, by the way, we're switching over to property now. We're not talking about people losses, but property losses. We do have some retained losses that essentially have come out of our back pocket rather than going through our property insurance. We had a bit of a rough year. When you think of Houston, freeze is not something normal. Maybe you guys up in Vermont and Colorado, and some of the northern parts of California, this is an issue, but around here it doesn't freeze very often. February 2021, we had a horrific freeze, 4 days of 15-degree Fahrenheit weather. It was absolutely incredible, and we sustained a lot of damage from that event. But the normal bane of our existence is water leaks within our buildings, around our buildings. And so the retained losses we want to minimize by aggressively managing things like water leaks. And we've had some lessons learned from that freeze event. Other events, small fires, automobile accidents, et cetera, some of which we're able to reclaim costs from third-party subrogation for things like auto accidents and the like. So this is something that our risk management group puts this information together so we can trend over the course of time. And yes, 1.1 million was quite a lot for us in FY21, but I can tell you from years past, this is down significantly based on our aggressive oversight and actions, down from $500,000 or more some years. So the last couple of years we've been down well under 100,000. This was just a little bit of a blip this year with that freeze event, and we're able to trend this over the course of time. As you'll see with all of our graphics that we display here, trending this information over the course of time is important for us. It's important for our stakeholders to see how we're doing. And on this particular slide with the retained losses, we're able to highlight specific, I'll call them hallmark events that have been a bit costly, and the reason why some of our retained loss years have been not so kind to us. Things like fires, named storms, Hurricane Harvey being a massive event for all of the UT system institutions kind of on the southern part of the state that got hit by that. We specifically call out some impacts and losses related to COVID-19 in terms of people who are exposed, completing supervisors' first reports of injuries based on those exposures in the workplace. Most of these are clinicians, so we have to act on those things. This winter storm, Uri, was the winter storm back in February of 2021 that we sustained about $700,000 in property damage. And safety never gets enough credit for all that we go through. And, I wanted to make sure that all of our stakeholders understood the significant office flood that we sustained this year. Our poor folks came in one morning. We've got an employee who carpools with her husband. She gets here at 6 a.m. each day, and she came into a couple of inches of water in our basements of our office building where environmental health and safety resides. And so we were able to maintain operations through a pandemic and a concurrent flood that had us displaced from our main office area for several weeks. And so, boo-hoo is us. But anyways, I just want everybody to understand what we went through to maintain our operations through those challenges. And then another key thing here, and this is something that is important for our safety folks from a prevention standpoint. For the first time in many years, our property insurance premium, the property insurance deductible for any occurrence doubled from $250,000 per occurrence to $500,000 per occurrence. It's the first time we've seen an increase like that in many years, and to have it double is quite significant. So the importance of prevention is really, really important now, so that we don't have $500K coming out of our back pocket every time we have a major event on our campus, and potentially even more than that, depending on the severity of some of these incidents that impact our buildings. As I mentioned, each section has a plan forward. So we look at our data and our experience from the previous fiscal year, and we plan forward what we're going to do in FY22. And I won't bore you with all the details about these different actions, but I can assure you that we build our department and our program goals around this. Next is related to compliance. We focus in on compliance with any external regulatory agency inspections, changes in regulatory compliance related things, and also with our internal evaluation or assessment program, where our own folks are going out routinely, pounding the pavement within our mechanical rooms, our classrooms, our offices, our laboratories, and our clinics. In regards to external regulatory inspections, FY21 was remarkably low. Normally, we're up above 20 regulatory inspections or more per year. We only had 5 during FY21. This absolutely was an impact related to COVID-19. We also saw modified approaches to regulatory inspections that were conducted, having virtual or hybrid inspections rather than fully on-site inspections, but overall remarkably low total number of inspections, and we always report in on any findings or non-compliance issues, of which we did not have anything significant this fiscal year. But we do always tailor our improvements around any regulatory findings that may occur. We do have to be ready, and I would advise you all to be ready. Maybe you're experiencing this already, to be ready for the new style of the way regulatory inspections are going to be conducted, whether they're on-site, fully virtual, or a so-called hybrid approach. Make sure you understand what the regulatory agency intends to do, what specifications they put into place for how to conduct the inspection in this new COVID world, because there may be differences to how they do this in years past. If they do come on site, they may want to know exactly what your precautions are that you have in place for COVID-19, whether you require vaccinations or certain personal protective equipment or actions when they're on your campus. So make sure you convey all that information in advance of their visit if they're going to be on site. This is a really important slide for us. This is the internal oversight that we have for our own internal risk assessment process. We do workplace inspections. We call them workplace surveys or assessments on a regular basis, of which we've done over 5,000 of them throughout our labs and clinics, mechanical rooms, et cetera. This is still down a little bit due to pre-COVID or compared to pre-COVID times, but we're still doing a good job visiting our spaces at least once a year, with some exception. And during those, we identify deficiencies. We know that we need to do a better job of correcting some of those deficiencies in a timely manner. So we're working with our various different stakeholders to do that. And then what's quite remarkable, and I really like to highlight to our leadership as well as to our own staff for their own personal edification, is that we remain remarkably high with the total number of people that we're training in terms of regular safety training that we do normally, plus COVID-related training. That includes respiratory fit testing and training. We got a lot more of our folks, including students, who are taking our online training. So our numbers continue to be way up compared to pre-COVID conditions. That takes a lot of manpower and effort on our side. So just something for us to know from a program management standpoint. In terms of internal compliance going forward, we know that there were some unique things that occurred on our campus throughout the course of the last fiscal year, and that we also have forthcoming major construction, new renovation, new building, and also renovations going on. So we need to be prepared for that. Talking forward also about the COVID-related challenges, we highlight some of those things so that all of our stakeholders understand how we're mitigating those, and going forward, how we're going to address compliance from the standpoint of the next fiscal year. Two things that are of particular highlight for our program, just for your own interest. We are actually eliminating several of our high risks on campus, which is a bit unique. We're getting rid of some of our cesium irradiators that we have on campus, and we are getting rid of our select agent program due to a retiring faculty member. So interesting to go through those processes. We're actually doing those things as we speak right now. Third KPI is finances. So we talk about both the costs of running our program and some of the revenue that we bring in due to some of the entrepreneurial activities that we participate in. You've already seen this graphic from Safety Bob's presentation. What I'd like to highlight is our FY21 numbers. We did increase quite significantly in one of our contracts to cover some of the delta or the gap, the white space at the top of the graphic on the right, because we knew that we had a significant gap that had been growing over the course of time. We were able to renegotiate our safety services that we provide to our clinical practice plan to cover some of that gap. Alan Lucas, for those of you who know him in our environmental program, does a remarkable job of managing our waste. We know that the cost of managing hazardous waste is only continuing to go up, but yet through partnership with the UT system Office of Risk Management for system-wide contracts, we're able to keep our waste disposal costs reasonably low, and then our own internal management system and approach, we're able to reduce our cost obligation quite significantly. In fact, if we were just to send out all of those waste, chemical, biological, and radiological wastes, and just let a third party manage all those, we would have been on the hook for about $200,000, but yet it only cost us $60,000 because of the aggressive and prudent management during FY21 by our team. That major blip that you see on the last slide, and this one is FY19, we got rid of a cyclotron by requirement from the Department of State Health Services, and that cost us quite a bit of money to get rid of. So that's why you see the major disposal costs there. In regards to the revenue that we bring in, because we have a contractual agreement with our UT physicians clinical practice plan to do safety in all of those outpatient clinic locations, we were able to negotiate a major increase in that contract. So $800,000 a year comes in for all of our services. We've got people roller skating around the greater Houston area that's geographically the size of the state of Connecticut to oversee the clinics around the city. And some of that money does get peeled off right away to help support our occupational health program. We also do a lot of training, peer reviews, and there's other speaking arrangements and things like that where we bring in some honoraria. So we've got almost $13,000 a year coming in for that. And then we've got some salary offsets for some grants that various employees, staff members within our department participate in. So we actually have generated about 25% of our total budget through these different activities. I won't bore you with the details about how we support our UT physicians clinics. You can read through this on your own, but please know that we have a lot of clinics and hospital locations that we oversee, not just within the UT physicians enterprise, but also within our school dentistry clinics. We have a big neurosciences clinic footprint now, and we have inpatient care within our Harris County Psychiatric Center, and they just doubled in size by adding what we call the Dunn Behavioral Science Center. So we've got well over 500 beds. It is the largest psychiatric care facility in the entire country at this point in time. Patients are coming in for the first time in that Harris County, or I'm sorry, the Dunn facility as we speak. So overall, in regards to our expenditures, our aggressive oversight of the way that we spend money, and certainly the hazardous waste management is really quite important. Our entrepreneurial activities continue to be supported by our leadership, so we're going to continue with those efforts to bring in money to the best of our ability. And our financial challenges going forward, we know that there's various different things impacting us. COVID continues to cost us a lot of money, as I'm sure it is for your campuses as well. We do have some issues with our occupational health program, some of the associated costs under the workers' comp program that we have many of our medical residents in. Now, because of the change that I explained to you, we know our property insurance deductible is going way up, in fact, doubling, and we've got a lot of growth with that behavioral science center that just opened. So anyways, important to communicate this to our leadership so they understand what gaps are in place for our funding. Now, you guys have seen the presentation last week about client satisfaction. We always showcase within our annual reports the client satisfaction survey that we do at the current year. So FY21, we surveyed our CLAMC, or animal care department. I shared that with you last week, so I won't go into the boring, gory details, but we do like to remind everyone, including our leadership, that we do this once per year. And over the course of time, we've hit all of our programmatic areas. Now we've been focusing on some of our partner departments, and we actually showcase the results of the current year's survey within the annual report. And we know we had some lessons learned from this feedback, which we've used to make improvements. Now, really important here, this is something that Dr. Emery and I really focusing on We are huge proponents of our own internal department staff satisfaction to maintain morale. We work hard to recruit and retain talent in many different ways, but making sure our troopers are happy and working hard is something that's really critically important, especially during COVID. And so we have a couple of things in place that we showcase here within the annual report. We like to remind everybody that we meet once a week. We have a department meeting. We always do continuing education for our staff at that meeting. We support our staff with opportunities for professional development and academic pursuits, which is something that is a little bit unique for us because we have a school of public health where they teach occupational and environmental health sciences and other related safety disciplines, where it's an obvious fit for many of our staff to consider getting graduate level education. We actually created a neat Safety Geek of the Week staff recognition program where somebody who's gone above and beyond the call of duty during the particular week. It's a kind of a democratic process where we pick a Safety Geek for the week. They get the little trophy that we've made. And over the course of time, that thing has turned out to look a little bit like the Stanley Cup, because everybody has to add something on it who wins the Safety Geek of the Week. So a lot of our folks participate in continuing education courses, things like the EH&S Academy. We also have a biosafety officer course, radiation safety officer course, a CHMM prep course, et cetera, that we teach. Many of our terminally degreed staff members participate in teaching academic courses at our various different schools, many of which are at the School of Public Health. Some of us have academic appointments at the school. Many of us participate on these grants that I was telling you about that are safety related grants, and we're able to enjoy some salary offsets for those people to pay for their time. And we do support and have been funded through our leadership to pay for membership and participation in various different professional organizations, whether it's SHEMA or any of the kind of specialized disciplines within the professional organization. So that's important for us as well. And then each year we have what we call a SHRM Mentoring Day, where we actually set aside time. Dr. Emery keeps his door open, I do as well, where any of our staff can come in and talk about their own personal situation with professional development. Hey, I'm thinking about going to school. What's the pathway for me that might be best? Hey, I'm thinking about a particular professional certification, and we can kind of talk through and provide advice during that day. A couple of things going forward for our client satisfaction going forward. We already have a plan for our FY22 survey, client satisfaction survey, which is going to focus on how we support our students on campus. And there's a student services committee that we sit on. So we're gonna focus in on possible improvements in that regard. This is kind of one of the summary slides that I really think is critically important for everybody to understand as we go through all this information, is that there are always going to be caveats to these KPIs. Yes, we hang our hat on these things. They're very important to us. They tell our story, but there's always caveats. That is, there's always going to be increasing complexity of research projects that we support on this campus. We've got a lot of dynamic things going on in our research community and our clinical community as well. The increased collaborations, the associated challenges with our institution internally, external institutions, et cetera, is always going to occur. So we need to keep pace with that. The increased complexity of our regulatory environment, certainly the regulatory cloud is always changing and never going away. The impacts of construction, both renovations and new construction is quite significant on our campus. We need to be able to kind of navigate through that process to ensure safety and health during those activities. And very importantly, we already talked about this, the pain, the suffering, the apprehension associated with every dot on that injury graph. We have to remember every dot is a person. We have to have compassion and empathy for that. And then, wait a minute, what about all the things that didn't happen? How do we articulate that within this report, within our everyday activities? We do a lot of things each and every day to help keep people healthy and safe and basically help make nothing happen. A good day in safety is when nothing bad happens. And so how do you tell our campus president that, Safety Bob's boss, who's the over research, how do we convince him? How do we tell all of our stakeholders that we do a lot of things each and every day to help prevent things from happening? So important stuff there. There's more to the annual report. I'm going to stop here and open it up for questions and discussion. But there's a couple of other additional slides that talk about how we serve the community in regards to teaching, research, and service. But I'll stop here for the sake of time. Questions, discussions? Fazia put in a note, the professional society's fees are high. Getting all sorts of ideas from you. Okay, very good. Yeah, we've been very lucky to be able to support our folks in at least one professional organization related to their program that they work. If we can do more than that, great. Oftentimes our budget doesn't allow us to pay for multiple memberships. But that is a nice perk. I'm curious, did SBH do away with concentrations? Dr. Emery, I'm going to kick that one over to you. I know there's been some changes with some of the academic programs there.
I think the way it works, again, I'm hiding behind my 15% faculty appointment, but I think when you're getting a doctorate, you can get these equivalent of a minor or a concentration, but I'm not sure. You'd have to check the SPH website on that to see if they did away with it or not. Not sure.
April, thanks for the comments. Yeah, please take what we've shared and make it your own. You know, even if you just glean one or two ideas from this, I'm happy to hear that, and hopefully it helps you guys. I always like to remind everybody, you know, these are the outcomes that we share here. Each and every one of our staff members in our department plays an integral part in the day-to-day activities that go into this culminating report. The monthly activity reports that each of our programs keeps with the little tick marks about all the different activities they do, whether they go and perform an assessment in a lab or a clinic, whether they train somebody, whether they perform an incident investigation or review a protocol. Those day-to-day activities are kept in a different format in our monthly activity reports. But at the end of the fiscal year, all of those monthly activity reports get tabulated. They get sent over to me, and my job is to add all those up and put that information into this annual report to summarize collectively our activities within the department here. So glad to hear this helps a little bit. As we mentioned, Bob and I have seen a lot of different forms and varieties of annual reports, and we've seen the good, we've seen the bad, and we've seen the ugly. And so hopefully this format that we've come up with over many years, and we keep adjusting it, improving it, and modifying it, helps you guys a little bit. Any other questions or discussion? Hang tough here for a moment, if you don't mind. And we're going to wrap up our presentations today. And I'm going to go through this relatively quickly for the purpose of time, to leave enough time at the end for discussion here. But we're going to finish up with a presentation on professional development. And this is a presentation that we've shared over the course of time based on our experience in supporting our own department staff, Safety Bob and my experience seeking our own professional development pathways throughout the course of our careers. It's always fun to share this information with those who are either new in the profession or who have been in the profession for some time, who are just looking for some advice and guidance on how to fine-tune their approach navigating the waters through professional development within the health and safety field. So hope you guys enjoy this presentation. Please jump in with any questions or concerns or feedback that you might have. In terms of professional development, you guys probably know this as well as anybody, that staying abreast of developments in the field is something that is a constant challenge for us, especially here in the health and safety world. Things are constantly changing for us, new technologies, new regulations, new things that are occurring in our labs, our clinics, our classrooms that we need to understand so that we can appropriately implement controls. So the routine and frequent assessment of risk is critically important. And then understanding all these different things is something we need to keep ourselves sharp on. The health and safety profession represents a compilation of a number of disciplines, and the change can be fast and dramatic, and management must be made aware of the need for professional development and the support for the effort. If it is overlooked or not appreciated and endorsed, then certainly in this field, if you're not staying up to speed on things, you can be quickly surpassed. And a great example is during this COVID-19 pandemic situation. I mean, the information about what we knew about SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 was literally changing by the microsecond. And so all of us had to go above and beyond to keep pace with that change in information. Obviously, not everything changes that rapidly as we're learning about a novel pathogen, but certainly the developments in our field are usually swift, so we need to keep pace. When you think about professional development, this is a really important slide. You guys may know this from your own experiences, but if you're framing out a plan for yourself, you really need to think about a three-legged stool approach. For professional development, we need to think about your work experience, your hands-on experience in the workplace. We need to talk about academic preparations and accomplishments, and professional certification. So recognition through the eyes of your peers that you are so-called experts in a particular field. So developing each of those areas is important as you progress through any profession, and certainly that's the case in safety. How do we do this? How do we stay up to speed with all these changes and feature or look at our three-legged stool? First of all, we need to develop and maintain professional networks. Part of the beauty of this course, as we've already talked about, is the network of people that we're expanding as we speak with the colleagues who are participating in this course. Do not let your relationships with the folks who are here stop after this course. It's really important to have all these folks in your Rolodex, because each of us brings different things to the table. Join and actively participate in professional organizations. This is really important, especially in the sub-disciplines within the health and safety field. Once you decide which area or areas you're going to specialize in, you can focus in on these different professional organizations and eventually build your name within the field or sub-discipline. Determine and think long and hard about how, where, and why you should further any academic preparation. So depending on which area of health and safety you're in, additional academic achievements may make a lot of sense. In fact, under most situations, it certainly does make sense, but there's obviously a time and effort and monetary commitment involved with that. Some subdisciplines dictate the need for additional preparations academically. So one example is the field of biosafety. If you look at the membership of the American Biological Safety Association and people who are practicing biosafety professionals, it is probably the highest percentage of terminally degreed individuals compared to any of the other disciplines within the health and safety field. And so if you're going to be a biosafety specialist, you ought to think long and hard about your academic preparations and whether or not additional graduate level and even terminal degrees make sense for you. And then credentials such as registrations, certifications, and licensure is certainly something you want to think about early on in your career, and as you go through what certifications, licenses, et cetera, makes sense for you. Interacting with peers is certainly important because proficiency in all areas is possible. I've used this term last week, I'll use it again now, is that there's no one in this field who is omnipotent and knows all aspects of health and safety. And so you need to think about your network, your Rolodex, and who your reliable points of contact are for different areas that you might not be as well versed in or well experienced. It's always nice to learn from others about practical problems and issues. That's the beauty of any professional organization, is to be able to rely on each other, even the people within this course, just to bounce ideas off of, have a sanity check, whether you're on a listserv with a professional organization or you're emailing or calling your friendly colleague at another institution. Oftentimes others have gone through and had experiences that we're going through now, so it's always good to have a sounding board or to fact check or get a sanity check from your colleagues. The beauty is that the safety business most often freely shares information. And so if you ask, most of the times somebody out there is willing to share their experiences, their information, their documents, policies, whatever, as we do in this course, so that we can help others build up their own programs. And as you probably know, we all love to talk about what we do. My wife always starts shaking her head at the end of the day when we're at home, and I tell her about all the safety geek stuff that I've been doing throughout the day. She's a great listener. She appreciates and loves what I do, but sometimes she's like, okay, I've had enough. So what is a credential? We're talking about going out and getting a professional certification. A credential is something that attests as being true or as meeting a standard. But really, technically, what that means in our line of work is that we're qualified in the eyes of our peers to do something, whether it's hazardous waste management, biosafety, industrial hygiene, or whatever. In many settings, it's requirements. These days in the health and safety profession, some job descriptions will require certain professional certifications or credentials to be in place. So you just need to kind of understand what direction you're going in and what the requirements are for certain credentials. Usually a credential consists of a minimum qualifications of certain years of experience, work experience, certain academic preparation, so they'll have minimum standards for a bachelor's degree or master's level degree or so forth and so on. There's always going to be some sort of application process where you submit an application to be considered for that credential. There's going to be a fees associated with that application. You'll have to write up usually some sort of cover letter. You're going to have to get some references from other professional colleagues to attest that you, in fact, have the experience and expertise that you're claiming. Professional credentials will typically have some sort of written exam that you need to pass to prove that you are competent in the different areas that are expected of that credential. And then once you obtain the credential, there's always going to be some continuing education requirements. So you need to think long and hard about what professional certifications might make most sense to you. And then once you understand what ones you might want to pursue, you need to think about the time commitments, the financial commitments, and also just the burden of obtaining and then eventually maintaining the credential. So each one of these steps, the application, the exam, and the continuing education requirements, or what we call credentialing maintenance, is going to cost money. So how is that going to be supported? All right. A couple of subtle differences here between certifications, registrations, and licensure. Certifications are granted by non-governmental agencies for meeting certain education and training requirements. A registration is something that's typically an acknowledgement by a governing body that a person possesses a set of qualifications versus a licensure, which is a government agency grants permission after determining that an applicant has attained some minimum level or minimum standard. So some subtle differences there. There are some of the professional safety organizations that have different levels of qualifications, such as a certification versus a registration, which we'll talk about here in a few moments. But why should you even pursue professional certification? It's important within the health and safety field in a number of ways. Certainly you want to increase your own personal professional knowledge. When you go through the competencies list that are listed for a specific credential, you are able to do a gap analysis and certainly obtain additional education or experience before you go and sit for the exam or apply and sit for the exam, so you can increase your professional knowledge. Certainly you improve your professional standing when you have these certifications. Again, you're recognized by your peers that you are competent in a specific area of health and safety. Certainly if you're going to be out on the job market, it increases your job marketability, especially if there are jobs that list requirements or preferred credentials. And certainly there are some instances where either for licensure or insurance purposes that a professional credential be in place or any combination of the above. But in other words, you want to learn more about your profession. You might want to get a new job. Certainly all of us want to get a raise, so there may be incentives depending on your employer. If you get a professional certification, there might be incentives monetarily for that to occur, or maybe you need to keep your current job, to keep pace with so-called competition within your colleague base, or within the job position that you might be in, again, or any combination of the above. There's professional certifications in the various different areas of health and safety. So if you haven't already thought about this or haven't explored it, if you want to give Safety Bob or I an email or a phone call, we can certainly talk you through any of these key areas. But the subdisciplines within health and safety that we deal with in an academic setting, all the professional organizations have some sort of credential that you might consider. This graphic we put together a couple of years ago, which I really like, which shows on the x-axis there the professional organizations, and the y-axis the total number of years in which those organizations have been in existence. And then in parentheses after the blue bars are the professional certifications associated with the professional organization. So for example, the American Public Health Association is one of the oldest organizations in the health and safety field, but yet they have one of the newest professional certification, which is the Certificate in Public Health that they just implemented a couple of years ago. If anybody has any questions about any of these or wants to talk about any of them a little bit further, please let me know. But it is interesting to reflect that information. When you look at these different areas of health and safety, and you determine kind of where you fit here, you want to think about this from the perspective of your pathway within your career, or how you're supporting your organization or the organization that you might want to work for in the future. You would need to consider what major areas of certification are available in these various different fields. And this target approach is kind of fun, because if you look at some of the things that are more common to different work settings, things like risk management and insurance, security, hazardous waste management are a little bit quote unquote universal, if you will, where some of the more specialized disciplines might be a little bit more specific for institutions that conduct specific types of work or research or clinical care activities. And so each one of these areas has professional certifications associated with it. And so you just want to think about which ones might be considered here. And then if you look at this target approach again, if you look at these core areas of physical safety, radiation safety, chemical safety, and biological safety, the professional organizations are listed on the outside in green. Then there are the registrations. These are basically when the organizations recognize you've met certain academic qualification requirements and experience requirements, but usually there's not an exam associated with a registration, unless there are some specific things like the ASP or Associate Safety Professional that do have an exam associated with them. And then when you get into the inner part of the bullseye of the target, you've got the professional certifications, which require the experience, the academic preparations, and passing the exam. And when you obtain these certifications, you set yourself apart from the rest of the field. Yes, you're recognized by your peers as being competent in this specific area of health and safety, but the total number of individuals that have obtained this experience, this education, and are able to successfully pass the exam is few and far between. And so there is a certain amount of rigor associated with each of these processes and the exams that is intended to ensure that only those that are well qualified obtain the certifications. This is just a table that we put together with the total number of individuals that are active members within the professional organization versus those that are recognized as either a registration or technologist level or board certified within the profession. So you can see that depending on the organization, sometimes a very slim percentage or small percentage of the total individuals within an organization are actually professionally credentialed. Now, this can set you apart in terms of being eligible for jobs and promotions and things like that. So something really to think about in terms of your pathway for where you want to go with your career. couple of comments for those of you who are thinking about professional certification who have not done this before. Certainly you want to think about and choose your professional development path carefully. Yes, it's okay to go down a certain pathway and change course over the course of time. It is not the kiss of death to pick something and then decide later on that this isn't quite for you. But over the course of time, that's why certain work experience minimums are required for these different certifications. You're gonna want to really understand that, hey, I'm committing myself to this profession to become an expert, to become a reliable resource for the field. And so choose your pathway carefully in that regard. Talk to people in the profession. Find a reliable mentor that can help you through the through the waters there. Understand the commitment level involved in terms of the application. Oftentimes, people like to take professional courses that will help prepare you for these exams to successfully pass them. So there's time and money involved with that. Certainly, to maintain the certifications once you get them takes time, effort, and money as well. So just make sure you understand the overall commitment. If you're new to this, take small steps to build confidence. That can be said for a lot of things in life. Prep for the prep courses. So don't be bashful. Even if you've been in this field for a long time, these prep courses that are designed by various different outfits, there's some professional companies out there that do this for a living. We offer these professional development courses to help prep people to take different professional exams. Even if you're experienced, take the courses. It's great refresher information. You can hone in on things that you might not know so well or haven't done in a while to get you fully prepared for these exams. Successful test takers think like test makers. Who do you think creates these different exams for these various different health and safety related credentials? It's those who are credentialed to the field. We are incentivized as credentialed professionals to give back to the profession by making up the test questions. We create test questions that are relevant and current to the field. To challenge those that are trying to get into the profession to understand this information. And so those who are professionals in the field are the ones making those exams. I can tell you that much. Oftentimes these exams are multiple choice. Think about your test taking strategy in terms of, if you're in the test room and there's going to be lots of distractors. Those distractors are there for a reason, to try to trick you. So make sure if you know something's not right, cross them out. And even if you're taking this electronically on a computer, you can often strike out these questions or the answers to the questions that don't make any sense. And that's a helpful strategy. Don't be afraid to fail. Sometimes if you fail the first time, there's always the opportunity with these professional credentials to apply to take the exam again. So don't be afraid to fail. Sometimes if you take it the first time, you really understand what's going to be on the test and what it takes to get to where you need to be to pass the exam. All right. Don't be left behind. If you want to pursue a certain career path in a discipline of health and safety and a credential makes sense to you, go ahead and do it. You say, stop saying I'll do it in the future. Just set your sights on what goals you need to achieve to get yourself there. And with initials comes responsibility. This is really important. With any professional credential, you're always going to have to sign a code of ethics statement. And there is responsibility that comes along with these credentials. People will rely on you as an expert in the field for certain things. Know that there are certain professional responsibilities that you will need to adhere to based on the code of ethics and responsibilities for those credentials. And that's very, very important because they can actually strip these professional credentials away from you if you misuse them in the different ways. So, and ultimately, this is a commitment to learning and paying if you're going to pursue these credentials, but lifelong learning is really important for me, and I would imagine you guys all agree with that. So even if you're a little bit more experienced or older in the field, it's still okay to go back and get these professional certifications if you're considering doing so. Make sure you prep for the tests. There's lots of ways you can prepare for a test, and everybody has their own little tricks of the trade. We've all been through many years of school at this point in time. Just think about what's the best way for you to study. Sometimes you can overwhelm yourself. Plan in advance. Don't wait till the week before the exam. Start a couple months in advance and make sure you consider things like those distractors. And every one of these exams, by the way, is going to be time. So make sure you understand before you go into the test room how much time is allotted for a specific exam, and then plan your pace accordingly. Just taking one example, CBSP, Certified Biological Safety Professional. This is the penultimate certification for the American Biological Safety Association. If you're going to explore this as a biosafety professional, there are certain educational requirements, experience requirements, and then you apply and sit for this exam. On the exam is 150 total questions. There are very clearly listed professional competencies that you need to know in order to prepare and be successful in passing the exam. So make sure you understand the question distribution for this 150 questions. These are pretty clearly stated out by the American Biological Safety Association. So as part of your preparation and study and strategy, you're going to want to focus in and understand all of this so you can target your studying appropriately. Now, if you don't get anything else out of this presentation, this slide here is probably the most valuable thing that ever came to me from Safety Bob Emery. And I was very fortunate to get this initially on a cocktail napkin at a happy hour one time. When I was young in the profession, I was very, very naive as to some of the professional development direction that I was needed to head into. But Safety Bob said, I'll make it very simple for you. And he drew out on a cocktail napkin this little graphic. And on the x-axis, he has the dollar sign. So the amount of money that over the course of time in your career that you have the potential to make, right? And he didn't put actual dollar amounts on there. He just put the dollar sign. And then on the y-axis is your working years, okay? The total span of your career. And if you were to work in a particular discipline or in health and safety as a health and safety professional over the course of time, you can expect that you're going to get merit increases over the course of time if you work hard and have, do a good job. And, there's cost of living increases and things like that, that over the course of time, you can expect hopefully an upward trajectory if all goes well. But this is with the caveat that if you do not pursue additional certifications professionally or additional academic preparations, this is your likely pathway, more or less. Now, what if you think long and hard about the academic preparations that might make most sense for you in your desired career path and the professional certifications that go along with that? As you gain work experience and head in this upward trajectory, each and every time that you get a new academic degree and or a professional certification, the doors will open up for opportunity. And your pathway is more likely to look like this if you pursue these things strategically throughout the course of your career. No, that doesn't mean every time you get a professional certification, you get a great bonus. Some companies and organizations do that. Unfortunately, here at UT Health, that's not how it works. However, these professional credentials, the academic preparations, and the work experience, that three-legged stool in combination, help to open up opportunities for advancement, whether you get a raise, whether you get a new job, a new promotion, or sometimes it takes leaving an organization and going and getting a new job somewhere else. But the likelihood that you're going to move up the food chain over the course of time and subsequently increase your earning potential is the door is opened up with these this three-legged stool approach. And I can tell you that looking back, today is 21 years for me since I started here at UT Health. 21 years later, just from this one job experience alone, this has been the story for me. So this is absolutely the way that things work, and you should consider this. I'm going to kind of just skip ahead here because we only have a few moments left, but the last part of this presentation is just traits and skills of good managers and leaders, things that you should consider for yourself, whether you're in a manager or leadership position now, or you're targeting this for the future. You should be considering and reflecting upon these things. These are in the slides that we're going to give you. I will stop here and open this up for discussion. I saw there's a variety of things that came into the chat box, so I want to address a couple of those things and also have a conversation before we close out here. So first question that I see here is there a list of organizations available for EH&S professionals for certifications memberships, etc. I don't know of a succinct list, although we've put together some spreadsheets in the past, and I think we'll be able to share some stuff with you. One of our endeavors has been to paint the picture of what it costs and how much time and effort it takes to maintain these different certifications. So I think that table could help to paint the picture for some of those things. Safety Bob answered some of the question there, but he absolutely is right. These are kind of the main health and safety related organizations. Which one would be best for infection prevention and control? Fozzie, if you guys remember, is a infection prevention and control practitioner. So for those of you who don't know, the APIC people, the APIC group has the certification in industrial, I'm thinking industrial hygiene, sorry, certification in infection prevention and control, or CIC certification. And so that's something that those who are pursuing profession in infection prevention target themselves on. Do hospital safety professionals take the same certifications? Yes, Fozzie, there is actually a certified healthcare safety professional, CHSP certification. A couple of our folks in our hospital and clinic safety program do have this credential. I can get you in touch with them, but it is I understand, I have not done it myself, but I understand from my colleagues who have done it here in the department, and I've talked with many others who have pursued the certified healthcare safety professional certification. They've been very satisfied with it and has served them well for professional developments, pay raises, et cetera, in the healthcare setting.
Sorry, Scott. Just to clarify, what I was asking is, if you were in infection prevention and had an interest in safety, which one of those, I guess, pathways or certifications would you pursue?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really depends on your area of interest. I would say the most reasonable overlap, and I welcome others' comments on this, probably the biggest overlap within the health and safety profession is infection prevention and biosafety. If you look at the professional competencies listed for infection prevention and also biosafety, because both professions are rooted in infectious disease prevention and control, just in different work settings, infection prevention folks primarily, although not exclusively, work in the healthcare setting. Biosafety professionals work primarily, although not exclusively, in the laboratory setting. Many of their professional competencies overlap, and many of the things that we do in biosafety, we certainly see in the healthcare setting as well. So, for example, let's just take isolation rooms for influenza, tuberculosis, COVID-19, whatever. The concepts of containment, directional airflow, air filtration, personal protective equipment, disinfection, decontamination fall right in line with biosafety just as much as they do with infection prevention and control. So I would say biosafety, to answer your question. I don't know if anybody else has any feedback for that.
This Bob, I would agree, but the other big one that's closely aligned would be industrial hygiene, because so much of it has to do with airflow and those sorts of things. So, and you can't go wrong getting a CI8. So it's widely recognized, it's very respected, and would actually, I guess, afford you some street cred in the handling of the chemicals and some of the other things that would be inherent to infection prevention and the like.
I completely concur. April says, I must be working for the wrong university because education and certification does not increase salary or upward mobility. A pat on the back is about all we get. So I've heard this before. I've heard this many times, in fact. And, that's fine. Certainly there's your own personal edification for doing these things, by all means. And hopefully, if you're able to tell your story and convince leadership why this is important, you can get additional support. However, and I hate to say this, but every once in a while, you might want to look at your current situation and maybe other organizations to work for another organization that does value these things. Maybe you have obtained these academic achievements and professional certifications, and now all of a sudden you've opened some doors for a new job somewhere else that's much better paying, maybe more satisfying. Now, I'm not saying leave your job, don't get me wrong, but you might want to think about that.
one of the greatest quotes I ever heard was when an evil administrator said, "What if we train them and they leave?" To which the response was, "What if we don't and they stay?"
How true. Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, I truly am blessed to have worked in an organization, and certainly for Safety Bob, who has always valued professional development, supported it, and I wouldn't be where I'm at today without that support. There's no question. And I've been elsewhere where that support has been in place, and I've been elsewhere where that support has not been in place. So, just think about it for your own personal circumstances, where you want to be now in the near term and the long term. That would be my advice. Is UT Health hiring? We're always hiring. The professional development opportunities that we provide here, to be completely honest, is a very important recruiting tool and leverage for us to retain good talent, no doubt.
You need to describe the artwork on the board.
Right. So let me skip to the end of my presentation here because I did close down early, but I'm going to skip to the end, and I have inserted this artwork for you all to enjoy. In 2015, Safety Bob grabbed a black pen and went to our whiteboard in our meeting room within environmental health and safety within our office, and he drew this reaction chamber, what he calls a UT Health reaction chamber. Really, this is the Bob Emery College of Nuclear Knowledge, which he has developed this model of getting people experience, getting people education, getting people certified. And yes, we've lost some good folks who have gone off to leadership roles at other organizations. That's who have been spit out the top and their names listed. We've lost a lot of people to our neighbors over at MD Anderson, as you've seen over the course of time. And then I actually left and came back, so that's why I'm recycled. Not everybody buys into this. Don't get me wrong. We don't force people into this when they come in. We put this all on the table. We offer this as a perk, and some don't necessarily take the offer. And so, yeah, there might be some sludge bottoms along the way, to put it very politely. But to this day, this graphic is up in our meeting room still, so that our staff can look at it, and they have all got their own goals for their own, their own pathways. But it's a great reminder, and I absolutely love this graphic. And then, as I mentioned, the Bob Emery College of Nuclear Knowledge, as I look at the different things that I have on my wall for my academic achievements, my professional development certifications, this might be the most valuable piece of paper that I have, which is a diploma from the Bob Emery College of Nuclear Knowledge. So Bob gives these out only to select few who make it through the pathway under his tutelage for the professional development, the academic pursuit, and the experience. So it's great stuff. Other questions, comments, feedback? Okay, well, you've made it to the end of the EH&S Academy Part 1. Thank you very much for your participation. We hope you enjoyed these so-called soft science topics. These normally, as we mentioned to you, are blended in with the hard science presentation that we provide. So Part 2 of the EH&S Academy, we'll see you back here soon for. But Part 2 will be the hard sciences. We'll get into the nitty and gritty of chemical safety, biological safety, radiation safety, environmental sciences, hazardous waste management. We even get into risk management and insurance, and fire and life safety. So these important hard science topics are to round out the so-called 50 questions for people who are going to be in this field and want to diversify their knowledge. And so we look forward to getting back here with you soon for Part 2 of the EH&S Academy. We welcome your feedback on how we've split this apart, because this is the first time we've put this into 2 parts. We chose to do this for a number of reasons, so we want to hear your feedback. Safety Bob?
Probably at some point we should just put a Bob Emery College diploma on the thing you just downloaded as a PDF, a fillable PDF.
Insert your credit card number here.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. well, put all this to good use and don't be shy. If you got questions or something like that, email us. I mean, we're all in the same boat, so we're happy to compare notes and share whatever we got, and like to see what you guys have as well. It's just a very simple project we have right now is looking at people's org charts. We're not so much interested in who's there, but how is it that the department conveys this important information, and what are the characteristics of the org chart? So if you have an org chart, we're not going to share it with anybody. We're just looking at the characteristics of them. If you want to email me, that would be great. We'll add them in the pile, and we're going to make a de-identified summary of the characteristics of the chart. So, and yeah, good chatting with you guys, and look forward to being back in person sometime.
So, hey, Michelle, thank you and team for helping out with this. There was one question that has come up about dates for part 2. I can't remember. Do we have dates pinned down for this already?
We do not. So
Okay.
everyone stay tuned. I put all of my closing notes in the form of an announcement in Canvas that will come via email. So please check that and stay tuned for 2023. We now have your email. You're on our list, so you will get that announcement.
Okay, great.
Guys, thank you very much. And I made this commitment the last time we did this virtually. I'm going to make it again. Because this was done virtually and we're not here together as I would prefer, the next time we are at an in-person conference, please come hit me or Safety Bob up, and we'll see you at happy hour. We owe you a beer. Thanks, guys.